Hi, welcome back guys, this is your friend, WTFW with another fiction. What if Deku survival in a superpowered monster world? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. He felt cold. Despite the fire around him, the only thing Izuku could feel was how cold his body was. As he helplessly lay on the ground with a hole in his stomach, the only thing was the coldness of his body. But he smiled. He did it. He got rid of all for one. He ended Tamira's suffering. He saved people. Izuku closed his eyes. I hope everyone's safe, he uttered with his last breath. Dude, I can't believe this. Izuku heard a familiar voice scream. As his eyes gradually opened, he had to cover his eyes because of the bright shine of the sun. Shut the fuck up, Sparkplug. An even more familiar voice shouted. Finally getting himself up, he found himself surrounded by trees and a few familiar faces. Kaminari was being strangled by Katsuki, while Kirishima, Shiro, and Mina tried to stop him. Yaoyorozu and Gyro were by a rock a short distance away from him. Kendo and Takage were bickering near a tree. Izuku patted his stomach only to find no hole. He patted several more times just to make sure. His hero costume was destroyed, leaving his toned abs exposed to the world. How? Izuku muttered. Midoriya, Kaminari pointed at him as Katsuki held him by the neck. Are you feeling all right, Midoriya-kun? Yaoyorozu asked him in concern. Izuku nodded. What happened? Where are we? We don't know how we got here as well, but we did find a big clue. Kendo was the one that replied, and Izuku noticed the hesitant look on her face. Is there a villain? Izuku immediately asked, trying to call for one for all, only for nothing to happen. It's better that you see for yourself. Yaoyorozu pointed at a tree. Izuku looked at the tree in confusion. A tree. Look at the bird mop top, Takage pointed out. Izuku saw a bird with a dark blue back with feathers on its stomach and red feathers leading up to its head. The bird looked very familiar, but he couldn't remember what species it was. Are we in another country? Try another world, fucking Deku. Wah. Pokemon World, Kaminari exclaimed in excitement, which led to Katsuki strangling him again. Which was odd now that Izuku thought about it. Then he remembered that he failed to call upon one for all. Looking towards Mina, her skin was tan, and her horns were gone. Gyro's earphone jacks were gone and Shiro's elbows looked normal. Our quirks. Suddenly, Izuku rushed towards Yaoyorozu and picked her up. Midoriya, Yaoyorozu blushed at the sudden action. Our quirks are gone, but the body adaptations remained, Izuku muttered. He cares more about quirks than the fact that we're in a world of a media franchise, Takage whispered to Kendo, who nodded in agreement. What are you talking about, Deku? Izuku turned towards Katsuki. Our quirk factor is most likely gone, but the adaptations our body gained to support our quirks remained, Izuku explained. Yaoyorozu's dense lipids, Kaminari's electricity resistance, Ashido's acid resistance. Izuku continued listing, but everyone else stopped listening by the first one. Bro, I can't believe he's ignoring the fact that we're in the world of Pokemon. Even Bakubro knows Pokemon, Kirishima mentioned. What are we going to do now? Mina asked weakly. Do you think we could go back home? Hey, Raccoon Eyes. Did you forget the only thing all of us had in common before waking up here? Izuku snapped his attention towards Katsuki. What do you mean? Yaoyorozu placed a hand on his shoulder. Midoriya, all of us were fatally injured and dying before we lost consciousness and woke up here. That means, you fucking nothing, Katsuki shouted. Not every casualty is you fucking fault. Bakugo is right, Midoriya. It's not your fault, Yaoyorozu assured him, the others nodding alongside her. Besides, we got a second chance. Maybe I can finally get laid, Kaminari spoke up. Fat chance, Gyro responded. I just wish I could have done something. Izuku's fingers into a rock, then proceeded to throw it through a tree. Everyone just looked at him in shock. It's easy to forget that he could still snap us like a twig, even without his quirk. Much to everyone's disappointment, especially Kaminari, everything didn't go exactly like the games showed. The first thing the group did was look for the nearest town while scavenging for food on the way, which was mostly composed of berries. But when they found the town, it gave them a lot of information to go with. The town was called Little Root Town, which revealed to them that they were in the Hone region. It was also good news since that meant they were near the Pokemon lab that gave out starters. Unfortunately, that only applied to regional lab-sponsored trainers, which they were not. My hopes and dreams. Ruined, Kaminari cried. Pathetic, Katsuki muttered in disgust. It also seems that the conference is already nearing its end, Yaoyorozu mentioned, as she read the notice the Pokemon lab gave her. I guess that means it's not worth participating. It's better to wait for the next one to start, Kendo spoke. At least we already got registered though. Kendo looked at the ID given to her. I can't believe how easy it was to get registered. Takage held up her own trainer ID. Be careful with that. The receptionist said that the first one is free. But if you lose it, we'll need to pay a fine. Whatever, I'm heading to the Pokemon Center, Katsuki grumbled as he marched away. Pokemon centers offered free lodging and breakfast for Pokemon trainers, as long as the conference was still ongoing, which solved their lodging problem for now. To earn money for their daily necessities, the group also began doing commissions posted at the Pokemon Center's task board. This was not how I expected things to go, Kaminari muttered as they cleaned a warehouse. You saw the perspective from a game made for children, Siro replied. You honestly thought it would go the same way. I wonder what Ye Momo and the others are doing, Mina asked out loud. Modeling. Shut the fuck up, Katsuki shouted in annoyance. I can't believe we're collecting herbs, Gyro commented. It's like those Ice Guy animes where the protagonist starts from the bottom in the Adventurers Guild, Takage mentioned as she dug out an herb. Kendo sighed. At least the scenario fits. Momo counted the herbs they collected. We only need a few more, and we'll have enough for food for the day and a few left over for the rest of us. Gyro didn't miss the conflicted look on Momo's face. Sucks being poor, huh? Yes, very much so. I wonder what Mop Top's doing, Takage asked out loud. I didn't expect such a healthy man would take our commission, a woman dressed in a white uniform spoke as they traveled deeper into the forest. Didn't expect you to be so strong too, Tilda. Izuku scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. The mission he took was to help carry supplies. It was specified that a Pokemon was not allowed to be the one to carry the supplies, so a lot of people avoided taking the mission. Even if advanced storage technology was a thing in this world, there were still limits to how well they performed. That made it the perfect job for Izuku. He was strong, even without one for all due to how much strength training he had to do. So carrying 3 bags that weighed over 100 pounds each was a piece of cake. Stop bothering him. The man leading at the front of the group spoke up. Let him focus on his task. He's getting paid 3 people's worth after all. The commission was originally meant to be taken by 3 people, but after they found out Izuku could carry all the bags with no issue, they just decided to pay him triple, so they could continue with the mission early. You're just jealous because he's big and strong, so women would flock to bed him. Izuku blushed. I didn't even know if he's human, another member of the group commented. The banter continued until they reached a clearing. This is the place, start setting up, the man ordered. At that moment, Izuku finally found out what the bags he was carrying contained. At first, he thought it was food, but the group had a Taurus carrying that instead. A little help, guys? Izuku approached a woman who seemed to be struggling to take something out. Izuku grabbed hold of something like a pillar and began pulling out. His sweat dropped when the pillar he pulled out turned out to be taller than himself. What was I carrying? You were carrying an area scouting antenna. A what? Etha Foundation? Izuku asked in confusion. I guess since you live here in Hone, you wouldn't know about us much, the woman stated. We're an organization focused on spreading Pokemon species into different regions. This machine would help us scout the area to find out what potential species we could move here, another person in the group added. The man leading the group approached Izuku. The payment has been transferred. Thank you for your assistance. You guys don't need carrying it back? That won't be needed, as we will be staying here for several weeks to map the area, the man explained. Izuku nodded and said his goodbyes before heading back to Little Root Town. That job alone paid him 3,000 Pokemon credits, so Izuku was quite satisfied. Once he gets back and eats some lunch, he'll probably take on another job. Commissions surprisingly paid a decent amount of money and could easily finance a person's daily life. But that only applied if you didn't have a team of Pokemon to feed, and there was also a risk of running out of commissions to do. Although Izuku registered to be a trainer, he wasn't entirely sure he'd commit to it and join the tournaments. He was pretty sure the others, except Kaminari, weren't sure either. They had just died in a war. They were teenagers that died in a war. Fought in a war. He wanted to find a way home. But settling down and living quietly in this world is an option too. Catching one Pokemon as a pet would be nice. He always wanted to have a pet, though it would be more like having a pet with a quirk. I can take care of myself, Mom. Izuku noticed a kid leaving the town with a woman worriedly following after him. Both had straight black hair and eyes. The woman wore a simple yellow dress, while the kid had whole hiking set up. I know, but I'm still worried as your mother. The woman reminded Izuku of his own mother, always worrying about him. In this case, the woman every reason to be worried since the kid looked around 10. Honestly, Izuku hoped the whole 10-years-old Pokemon trainer thing wasn't actually a thing in this world. There's literally fire-breathing dragons out there, and people are letting children chase after them. The kid in front of him looked like a twig. Izuku could punt him to the next region if he wanted to. A Machamp would do it for fun. The kid began marching away in annoyance, leaving his mother at the town entrance. Izuku felt bad for the mother, so he approached her. It'll be all right, Mrs. Izuku said. I'm sure he'll be fine out there. He sure hoped so. The woman looked at Izuku with teary eyes. I can't stop being worried about my baby boy. He's all I have. Ah, Izuku wondered if this was the usual case of single moms in this world. Thank you for worrying, the woman said as she began walking back into town. Izuku wondered if that's what her mother looked like when he left for Ua. He could only imagine that it was worse for her since her son was younger and would actually be in more constant danger compared to a school. Albeit Izuku and his classmates were attacked by villains regularly. But you people should get the point. Hell yeah, Izuku was greeted by the sight of Kaminari cheering. What happened? Izuku asked as he approached his friends. They were currently gathered in the Pokemon Center's lobby. Katsuki, Ashido, Kaminari, Kirishima, and Siro were the only ones present. He's happy because he found out that there are more women in this world, Siro replied with a tired look on his face. How'd you guys know that? Katsuki glared at Kaminari. You'd want to sit down for this one, nerd. Izuku didn't like the meaning of that. Katsuki had greatly mellowed out, so when suddenly acts like this, it meant it wouldn't be good. The mortality rate of Pokemon trainers is 1 out of 100 and most trainers going on journeys are male, Katsuki explained. Izuku glared at Kaminari. He's happy about that. Kaminari flinched. No, that's not the part where I cheered. There are more reasons like wars and most criminals locked up are also men. So there's a significant difference of single women compared to men, Katsuki added. It bothered Izuku that Katsuki explained that with a straight face to him of all people. But what he heard did answer a lot of questions he had about this world. That means I have a higher chance of getting a girlfriend here, Kaminari grinned. Izuku looked at him with an unamused stare. Hey nerd, Izuku turned to Katsuki. I'm joining the tournament, he declared. You better be joining too, 'cause I'm going to beat you, Katsuki stated before walking away. The rest of the Baka squad turned to Izuku. Can't catch a break, huh? Let's see. Izuku looked over the commissions to check for anything good. He was mostly interested in missions with heavy lifting involved, so it could act as a job and training at the same time. And coincidentally, there was one that looked interesting. It was mission requesting help to move appliances, which wouldn't be hard for Izuku. He took the paper and handed it to a nurse stationed at the commission counter. Once they informed the employer that Izuku accepted the job, Izuku began heading to the address provided. Upon arrival, he noticed a familiar face. Oh, you're the boy at the town entrance. It was the my woman from earlier. Yes, ma'am. I was the one who accepted your commission. I see. I just need some help moving my stuff out of the truck and into the house. The woman gestured to a pickup truck. You were moving on the same day as. Izuku stopped, not wanting to remind the woman about her son. Yes. My son didn't know though. I had sold our house to give him funds for his journey. So I rented this place. She gestured to the small house behind her. Izuku's heart ached a bit. Oh, where are my manners? My name is Nadia. I'm Izuku, he bowed. Shall we get started? That would be nice, Nadia nodded. Izuku approached the truck and lifted a giant box with ease. Oh my, I thought you were going to use a Pokemon. Izuku just grinned and carried the box into the house. The whole process didn't take long since Nadia didn't have a lot of stuff. Just a few appliances and boxes of clothes. The sweat on Izuku's body was mostly caused by how hot it was in home. And just for everyone's information, Izuku's clothes were nothing more than plain black shirt and sweatpants that he got from the Pokemon Lab's lost and found box. Thank you for your help, Izuku, Nadia said as Izuku placed down the last box. Just doing my job. By the way, can I ask how much is rent here? Izuku had to admit that even though it was just a one-story house, it had everything a person needed and even a front yard. Oh, this place is only 1,000 credits for a month. Izuku's eyes widened. He just got paid 3,000 earlier in the day and is getting paid 2,000 for this job. This place is cheap. He was definitely considering just settling down in this world. Nadia chuckled. Would you like to live here with me? She offered with a teasing smile. Don't tempt me, ma'am, Izuku laughed. Maybe I should. I'm all alone after all, she joked, hopefully. Izuku wanted to change the subject now. If it's all right, can I ask where? Izuku glanced at the picture of Nadia and her son. Oh, Nick's father? Nadia picked up the picture. He was a Pokemon trainer I met 10 years ago. We traveled for a year and got close. Something happened and I thought we'd be together. But after that night, he was gone the next day. I'm sorry, Izuku looked down, feeling bad that he had asked. Don't worry. This stuff happens often, and it's not like I could chase after him to the afterlife. Izuku flinched. He's dead? Yes, Nadia said with a smile. Izuku wanted to get out of here. A month has already passed, and Izuku had felt a bit sorry for his friends. He had noticed that they were missing their quirks. Gyro would occasionally reach for her ear since she had a habit of twirling her jacks, only to look sad when she realized they were no longer there. Yaoyorozu would sometimes stop to stare at her palms, as if waiting for something to come out. Even Katsuki developed a habit of tapping his hands on anything to try recreating a popping sound. Izuku, however, barely missed one for all. He had lived most of his life quirkless. A power that he only had for barely over a year wouldn't affect him much. Another thing was that One for All's purpose was to defeat All for One, who didn't exist in this world. Though, Izuku missed the vestiges. Midoriya-kun, Izuku turned around to see Yaoyorozu wearing a business suit. Did you need anything, Yaoyorozu-san? A thing to take note of was that Yaoyorozu had gotten a part-time job at the Pokemon Lab as an assistant. I just wanted to talk to you about the next league conference. What about it? Izuku asked in confusion. Well, Bakugo and his group had already voiced their intent in joining, and would most likely be traveling together, Yaoyorozu started. Itsuka and Takage would also be traveling together. Izuku nodded, not knowing about Kendo and Takage, but somewhat expected it. Me and Kyoka would be traveling as well. So I wanted to know if you would be as well. I haven't actually decided yet. Izuku couldn't lie and say he wasn't interested. But was he ready? There were still 2 months left in the current league, and another month after that before the next league began. None of them had caught a single Pokemon yet, and wasn't a sponsored trainer of the league to get a regional starter. Another problem was, we're broke. Yaoyorozu grimaced. I'm aware. Well, we can't do anything about it much except work our asses off like usual, Izuku sighed. Yaoyorozu nodded. That's all I wanted to say. As Yaoyorozu left, Izuku could just stare blankly at his barren room. Not a lot of jobs today, Izuku muttered as he checked the task board. Everything on the board was menial tasks that paid too little for Izuku. Is there an issue, Mr. Izuku? A nurse approached him. Oh, there's no problem. Just looking at the commissions today. I suppose none of them are to your preference, the nurse commented. Since she was the nurse that acted as the mediator for the commissions, she had gotten to know his and his friends' preferences in commissions to take. I recommend going to the Pokemon Ranger base. They might have missions that you'll like. Izuku nodded and thanked the nurse before heading out. It was still quite early, so Izuku decided to squeeze in an exercise and jogged towards the Pokemon Ranger's base. Little Root Town wasn't a big place, which meant Izuku didn't take long before arriving at his destination. It was a 2-story log cabin that was at the exit of the town heading for the forest. Hey there, buddy, what brings you here? Izuku was greeted by a woman with short brown hair and was dressed in the ranger uniform. The nurse at the Pokemon Center mentioned that Pokemon Rangers also give out commissions. Can I have a look? The woman looked Izuku over. Do you have a trainer ID? Izuku reached into his pocket and handed the woman his ID. The woman took out a tablet-like device from her bag and swiped his ID on it. No registered Pokemon under your name? I just got registered a month ago and still saving up some credits. Admirable. But I recommend you take on the simple requests. The woman gestured for Izuku to follow her inside the base. She led him to a similar board from the Pokemon Center. But Izuku noticed some rather disturbing things. There were wanted posters with bounties. Are those criminals? Yes, the woman responded. I heavily suggest you avoid getting involved with those and stick to these ones. She pointed at the posters with gathering and scouting requests. Good luck, kid. Don't hesitate to ask if you need help. She winked at him before leaving. Izuku immediately looked at the wanted posters. Most of them were organized together and listing them as a group that acted together. Izuku also noticed that most of the crimes listed were poaching Pokemon. That made him wonder if these guys were still even here. Most of the Pokemon Izuku has seen in the area were the common ones that people only usually use to level up their starter in the game. They still had the potential to be strong, but they were too common to be worth poaching and getting locked up for. Then Izuku realized something. He suddenly rushed out of the ranger base and sprinted into the forest. I told you guys it was worth waiting here, a bearded man said with a grin as he glanced at the Etha Foundation employees that were tied up and gagged. Never doubted you, Buzz. A tall, lanky man laughed as he threw a sack of Pokeballs into a truck. Who would have thought that rare Pokemon in this region would be handed to us like candy? A woman laughed with her Nuzleaf right beside her. We might get an early retirement with this, right, Woods? Definitely, Mira. Woods responded as the lanky man looked at the list of Pokemon the Etha Foundation brought. They even have Realist. Those are fucky. The man didn't get to finish as someone grabbed him by his collar and slammed him into the ground. Wah, the leader named Buzz barely had any time react before a green-haired teenager was already reaching for his face, only to be saved by his Machoke. But neither he nor his Pokemon expected the teen grab onto Machoke's arm and proceeded to judo flip the Pokemon over his shoulder, then bicycle kicked him in the stomach. Nuzleaf, Razorleaf. The wily Pokemon unleashed the attack, but the teen easily avoided the attacks while dashing towards them at the same time. The teen took a half step and planted his left foot onto the ground and kicked a rock towards them with such force that it was comparable to a rock throw. The rock slammed into the woman's stomach, causing her to kneel in pain. Kill that fucker. Her Nuzleaf used Razorleaf once more, but the teen kept avoiding it with ease. Then she smirked as the boss's Machoke managed to grab hold of the green-haired teen. Time to die. As her Pokemon was preparing another attack, her Nuzleaf was suddenly tackled by a blue blur covered with white energy. Rio! Izuku saw the wild Pokemon tackle down the Nuzleaf and tried with all its strength to hold the Pokemon down. Victreeable. Izuku glanced to the side to find the lanky man he slammed to the ground earlier, holding himself up by the side of the truck with his Pokemon out. A vine whip tossed the Riolu away from the Nuzleaf. Then Razorleaf followed up the attack. Machoke, get rid of the brat and let's go. The Pokemon Rangers won't be far after that brat, the boss ordered. Izuku was tossed and slammed through a tree. It's been a while since he felt this much pain, but it was nothing compared to what he had experienced in the past. He saw the poachers getting into the pickup truck, and they made the mistake of returning their Pokemon. The Riolu from earlier grabbed onto the woman's leg, trying to stop her from escaping. The boss managed to kick the poor Pokemon off, but those few seconds it bought gave Izuku enough time to get in front of the truck. His muscles strained as he began lifting the front of the truck. You got to be fucking kidding me. Is that brat even human? Izuku lifted the truck with the front pointing down to the ground. Then with all his strength slammed the truck behind him. Smash! Was it brutal? Yes. Could the poachers have died? Maybe. Did Izuku care? A little. Izuku had just been in a war a month ago, so mercy was a bit foreign for him at the moment. He heard some groans, so they were still alive at least. What happened? The Pokemon Rangers arrived riding on their Pokemon. Izuku was already too tired, so he just pointed to the tied-up Etha Foundation employees before fainting. Izuku never thought he'd be in this kind of situation again. Staring at the hospital room's ceiling was a nostalgic experience, though not a good one. The door to the room opened, and a somewhat familiar face came in. The woman had green hair and wore a police uniform. Hello, how are you feeling? Been better, Izuku replied. The woman nodded. I'm the Officer Jenny of Little Root Town, but you can call me Officer Liz if it gets too confusing. Izuku already looked confused. Liz. I guessed you didn't know. Officer Jenny is a title, not my name. Oh, that makes sense. Izuku nodded in understanding. Did you come from my statement? Not exactly. Those three were already wanted criminals, so we don't need confirmation on who's the bad guy, Officer Jenny explained. I mostly came here to inform our hero that the criminals have been successfully locked up, and to inform you of your reward. My reward? Of course, Officer Jenny showed Izuku a tablet. 175,000 credits will be transferred to your account based on the criminal's total bounty and additional 50,000 credits for your act of heroism. Isn't that too much? Izuku looked at the large numbers in concern. We're not stingy with our heroes. Not a lot of people would risk their lives to save others. Izuku just stared at the tablet before handing it back to Officer Jenny. You don't need to worry about the hospital bill. We've got that covered, Officer Jenny assured him. I look forward to what you'll do in the future, kid. Izuku watched as Officer Jenny left the room, then stared back up at the ceiling. He couldn't help but smile. Momo groaned as she was heading back for the night. It was busy, horribly busy at the Pokemon lab today, since a bunch of lab sponsorship applications arrived today. The applications came from all around the region despite each city having their own Pokemon lab. The reason for that was because Nigel Birch was stationed here, the regional professor. Rough day? Kyoka asked her as they met up for dinner. Very. I can't believe how so many people think they can just stupid ideas for research, expect the regional professor to be impressed. Stupid ideas? Momo nodded. There was this one person who said they wanted to research fire types use fire type moves. Sounds like Kaminari. Momo just groaned. I think they just want to establish a connection with Professor Birch to get a starter. Don't we already know who gets those? Kyoko raised an eyebrow. Both of them had a decent amount of knowledge about the franchise, so they knew about the protagonist and their rival. Which in this case, May would take Torkic, and her rival Brendan would take Mudkip. How did they know? Well, Momo worked at the lab and occasionally saw Brendan, the son of the professor, which meant he was the rival and May was the daughter of the Petalburg gym leader. And in the anime franchise, she would pick a Torkic. There were still some possible scenarios, but Momo was sure that's how things would turn out. What about the Trico? Kyoka realized. Apparently, it would be given to the hero who recently caught some poachers and saved a lot of Pokemon and the Ether Foundation. Wow, that sounds like something Greeny would do. Kyoka's nonchalant look turned to realization. It's Midoriya, isn't it? I wasn't informed, but they did mention the hero had absurd strength. No shit, Sherlock. Dinner became a quiet endeavor for the two after the news that their friend had not changed at all. Once they were done eating and paid the bill, they made their way back to the Pokemon Center. When they got there, a nurse called out to them. Both of you are Mr. Izuku's friends, right? Ah, let me guess. He's in a hospital. Kyoka pinched the bridge of her nose. Yes. Perhaps could either of you inform him that this little guy is waiting for him? Both ladies raised their eyebrows and turned to where the nurse was gesturing. At the counter of the Pokemon Center, a Riolu was patiently sitting at the corner of counter. Oh, we'll make sure to tell him. Thank you, Momo bowed. I wonder if the others knew, Izuku whispered as he walked out the hospital. He had to admit, whatever they used to heal him was better than Recovery Girl's quirk. He didn't feel tired and all the pain in his back was gone. Midoriya, Izuku looked up to see Yaoyorozu and Gyro. Are you already discharged or escaping again? Her eyes narrowed. I'm already discharged. Izuku raised his hands in surrender. I'll go ask the front desk just to be sure. Gyro marched past him. Izuku just sighed. After they confirmed that he wasn't lying, he began explaining what happened. Momo frowned when he didn't call for backup, and she promised to tell the others, which will probably result in him getting hit a few times. They also told him that someone was waiting for him at the Pokemon Center. Hey there, buddy. Izuku approached the counter where the Riolu was waiting. The Pokemon jumped off the counter and shyly stood in front of Izuku. The teen wasn't expecting the Pokemon to be this meek, after he saw it fearlessly tried to fight the poachers and help him. Seeing it up close, it reminds me of someone, Yaoyorozu commented. Gyro nodded. From what Greeny told during the story, this little guy is an exact copy. Izuku wasn't oblivious to what they were implying. I don't suppose you'd want to join my team, would you? Izuku held out an arm. The Pokemon beamed and reached for the hand with its paw. Rio. Let's be Hero's partner. 2 months have passed, and a lot of changes have happened. The first was the fact everyone in their group had acquired a somewhat of a stable way of getting income. Kyoka became a song artist. occasionally recording albums and getting a good portion of the earnings every time. In the 2 months, she wrote and recorded 3 songs. She'll continue writing songs during her journey with Momo since she believes she'll be able to handle juggling the two. Nothing's impossible for a musical hero. As for Momo, she became a researcher under the regional lab. Her research focused on a Pokemon's dietary needs. Although similar studies have already occurred, Momo's had the added layer of factoring their natural environment and potential rivals in the area. That required her to examine the environments as well, which would go well as she was going on a journey. She's also doing modeling on the side with Izuku and Setsuna. Izuku and Setsuna occasionally join Momo, with her modeling with Izuku leaning towards more on sportswear, while Setsuna preferred doing commercials. Katsuki's group, much to his annoyance, became streamers mostly led by Kaminari. After they found out Izuku got a Riolu, Kaminari reacted the most and worked the hardest to get everything started and start earning money. Kaminari and Zero leaned to more comedic content and often doing challenges requested by their viewers. Kirishima focused on workouts and exercise that could be done with Pokemon, while Mina wanted to do dance videos. For Katsuki, he decided that he didn't want to lose to Izuku and began doing escort missions and bounty hunting with Izuku. Don't you find it weird that both of us have 2-stage dog Pokemon? Izuku asked as both of them sat on a branch of a tree, waiting for their target. Shut the fuck up, nerd, Katsuki grumbled as he fiddled with his Growlithe's Pokeball. Just do your job. Izuku rolled his eyes. They were spotted by some rangers heading towards Petalburg Woods, so it's most likely that they were after the Trico colony. That didn't look touched during the fucking show, Katsuki commented, referring to the anime episode where Ash caught his Trico. Doesn't mean they won't try, Izuku replied. At that moment, he smelled smoke. He smirked. Now, who would camp outside when the city is just an hour away? Our motherfucking moneybags, Katsuki gained a feral smirk. Both of them were dressed in dark green combat gear, which allowed them to stealthily move around the forest without being seen by their targets. They also had repels on them to prevent wild Pokemon from revealing their location. Confirming the Sneasel gang. All 5 members accounted for, Izuku whispered. I'm going in, Katsuki dashed around the small camp, lighting up 2 tents. Fuck, fire. 2 men rushed out their tents to put out the fire. 2 more rushed towards a small pond to get water. When one ran back to camp with bucket of water, Izuku swooped down a tree and wrapped an arm around the criminal, keeping a tight hold until they lost consciousness. Once the man fell limp, Izuku tied him up with help from his Riolu. In that short moment, the other man came back to the pond to get more water, but was met by a quick chop to the back of the neck by Izuku. I have to thank Izuku for that one. Where's the fucking water? The leader of the group yelled as his Geodude was shoveling dirt to put out the fire. Izuku smirked. The information that their group did not have a single water-type Pokemon was accurate, and that would secure their success. Izuku shot a flare that got the remaining 3 criminals' attention. Shit, we've been found. The leader grabbed a bag and tried to make a run for it with his Pokemon, but Katsuki shot out of a bush and captured him with a rope, while his Geodude was knocked out by a rock smash from Katsuki's Growlithe. The 2 remaining criminals didn't get a chance to react as Izuku knocked one of them out with a kick, while the other received a rock smash from Riolu. I told you learning rock smash from Riolu would come in handy, Izuku commented as he took the men's Pokeballs. Katsuki grumbled in acknowledgement, which made Izuku laugh. A few seconds later, the Petalburg Pokemon Rangers arrived to apprehend the criminals. 120,000 credits each. Finally going to buy a Firestone? Izuku asked Katsuki as they left the ranger base after getting the bounty. Fuck off. A top class one is worth 200,000 credits, Katsuki grumbled. Izuku couldn't help but pat his rival on the back. The way prices worked in this world was quite simple. If it was for humans, you'd get it at a cheaper price than you'd expect. If it was for a Pokemon, you'd better be a millionaire. The league is already over, and only a month left before the next one starts. Katsuki smirked. You better be fucking ready, nerd. Watching Katsuki walk away, he knew that he wouldn't be seeing him for a while. But he decided to think about that later. For now, he needed rest since he would be returning to Little Root Town tomorrow to get his new Pokemon. Fascinating developments, Professor Birch muttered as he read Momo's reports. Each group tries to find a way to compromise with each other instead of competing. Yes, but I found that only applies if the groups are from different egg groups. Nevertheless, this would be valuable information for the Etha Foundation. Momo grimaced. She wasn't a big fan of the games, but she quite liked the anime, so Momo had a good idea of the story. She knew the Etha Foundation wasn't a clean organization, so hearing her research would be beneficial to them made her uncomfortable. Good Joe! A hand was placed on Momo's shoulder and instantly reacted to grab the hand and twisted it behind the person's head. Gah! I'm sorry. Momo released the man. I'm easily startled. It's all right. The researcher waved it off and walked away. Momo looked down as Professor Birch spoke up. You've already mentioned to me how you and your friends came from a war before moving her in home. I didn't want to question you about such a war that needed students to be involved, but I heavily recommend that you seek therapy. I understand, Professor. I'll do my best to make time. That's all I ask. Momo bowed before heading out of the lab, running into the professor's son. Ah, hello, Miss Momo. Brendan bowed with a blush on his face. Hello as well, Brendan. Momo greeted back before continuing her way. Kaminari and Zero are in Mobile City, while Kirishima and Ishido are in Rustboro. Izuku muttered as he waited in the lobby of the regional Pokemon lab. It's been a while. Momo approached him, dressed in a lab coat and a red turtleneck underneath. Well, don't you look fitting in a lab coat? If I didn't know that your tongue only had good things to say, I would have thought you were flirting with me, Momo giggled. Why not? We're adults now, right? Izuku smiled. Perhaps. Momo held out her hand, which Izuku stared at in confusion. Trainer ID, please. Izuku shrugged and handed her his ID. Momo walked towards a desk and placed his ID on a device. Then his trainer information appeared on a screen. Izuku, Midoriya, Japan. Age 1807-15. Badges 0. Conferences 0. Current team roster. Rialu 0. It only displayed basic information that people would assume wouldn't be much of a problem. But from Izuku's personal experience, people you don't know knowing your name was already too much. Some of you might say, why didn't they use fake names? What's the point? People in this world didn't even know they existed 3 months ago. That would just make it harder for them to get used to new names. You haven't done any official Pokemon battles? Momo raised an eyebrow at the 0 beside the sole Pokemon on Izuku's team. No, just pure training and having him participate in missions. The number beside the Pokemon's name indicated their rating or power level. A 0 meant it was unranked. 1 to 3 meant the Pokemon was just recently obtained. 4 to 6 meant that the Pokemon was already trained. 7 and 8 meant they were elites. 9 and above was reserved for Pokemon that were monsters that were on a different level. Momo had given all of them a lecture about such vital information that was never mentioned in the games or anime. And it was not an optional class. It is illegal to not update your Pokemon's rating. You will be evaluated later, so that gym challenges will be more accurate to your skill level, Momo lectured. Yes, ma'am, Izuku saluted. Momo sighed. Follow me. Momo led Izuku into a room where several researchers were working. They stopped in front of a table that had 3 pillows laid out on it, but only one had a Pokeball on top of it. The other 2 already taken. Yes, you should have seen Kaminari's reaction when he saw Ash. Momo giggled as she handed Izuku the remaining Pokeball. He practically got on his knees and began worshipping him like his god. It was no secret that Kaminari was a fan of the franchise, so Izuku didn't find it hard to imagine how Kaminari would react. Should have been here to see it. Not that you have your new Pokemon. Let's head to the field. Izuku's eyes widened in realization. You're the evaluator? Yes. In just a few weeks, Brendan's journey will officially begin. He had already got his starter and spent a few days training and getting to know Mudkip. He'll definitely train hard with his Pokemon and show the world that he was the very best. People will acknowledge him, so will she. Brendan blushed as his mind went back to the woman always plaguing his mind. Miss Momo. She was beautiful, smart, kind, and many more. The perfect role model. The battlefield is this way. Brendan's head snapped towards the source of the beautiful voice. He saw Miss Momo leading a green-haired guy to the battlefield behind the lab. Brendan followed them and noticed that Miss Momo had taken a spot on the field, with the green-haired guy taking the other spot. Only your Riolu would be assessed since it has been in your care for over a month now, so a simple one-on-one would suffice. Brendan had never seen Miss Momo battle before, so he was very excited to see this. The green-haired guy nodded. Riolu, time to show them how strong you are. Mowile. Miss Momo called out her Pokemon. Then a monitor on a pushcart came to life and displayed the data on their Pokemon. Riolu 0 versus Mowile 2. Start us off with Crunch, Miss Momo called out. Mowile ran towards Riolu, then, as it was getting close, jumped and spun so that its back was facing towards Riolu for the attack. Use Quick Attack to dodge. The Riolu was enveloped with white energy before dashing to the side and digging its feet on the ground for a quick stop. Force Palm. Riolu unleashed a quick strike to Mowile's side, sending the Pokemon back a few meters. You've been holding out on us, huh? Miss Momo had a smirk on her face. Play rough. Mowile charged again, but this time it was a lot faster. Brendan had seen a lot of Pokemon battles before, but he hasn't seen a Pokemon move that fast before, even his father's. Riolu was hit by a smack from Mowile's back mouth, but endured the blow and remained close. Counter. Sucker Punch. Riolu's right paw raised for the attack, while Mowile mirrored the move for a Sucker Punch. Mowile would normally be faster with the priority move, but Riolu raised its left arm for a quick guard to block Mowile's attack and hit it with a powerful uppercut with counter. Looked familiar? The green-haired guy smirked. You really made a mini-you, Miss Momo responded. Play rough again? This time Riolu jumped back to create some distance. Fairy Wind. Force Palm. As Pink Wind grew closer, Riolu slammed its hand hard on the ground, creating a small shockwave that managed to redirect the Fairy Wind. What kind of main character bullshit is this? Miss Momo's eyes twitched. Several people watching gasped, hearing the elegant woman curse for the first time. Let's be honest here. The Riolu evolution line has main character vibes, the green-haired guy chuckled. Charge in with Play Rough. Sword Dance while there's some distance. Sword Dance activated quickly, though Mowile was already close enough to strike. Riolu received a heavy hit from Mowile, and Brendan noticed the arm fall, probably broken. Keep at it, Mowile. Brendan's eyes widened by how cruel Miss Momo sounded. But to everyone's surprise, Riolu used its broken arm to unleash a counter that made Mowile stagger back. Finish it with Force Palm, Riolu slammed, its paw directly into Mowile's stomach. Iron Head. With all its strength, Mowile tried to use its back mouth for one more attack, only for Riolu to catch the mouth and spun and flipped Mowile over its shoulder and slammed it hard on the ground, knocking it out. Miss Momo's eyes twitched more violently. Riolu had lost his home when a group of humans invaded. They either tried to get rid of any Pokemon that tried to retaliate or capture those that surrendered. Riolu was one of the lucky ones that managed to run away. Unfortunately, his parents weren't. Riolu didn't blame all the humans for what happened though. His species was smart enough to know the deed of an individual should not be held by their species. Instead, Riolu vowed that he would prevent such a thing from happening to others. That opportunity came too soon. The fighting type was included in a relocation program by the humans. But as they arrived, trouble found them. Riolu only found out what was happening when he was released from his temporary Pokeball and found himself inside a sack filled with other Pokeballs. When he managed to get out, he found a human fighting the other humans and their Pokemon. It wasn't hard to find out who was bad, when only one side was yelling, "Kill, get rid of," and many words that he similarly heard from the invaders of his home. As the human fought the other humans, Riolu targeted the other Pokemon within sight. That didn't result in much, and the sad attempt to stop them from escaping by clinging to one of the human's legs just resulted in him getting knocked out. Thankfully, that incident got resolved, and he was treated at a Pokemon Center. The nurse that was taking care of him began retelling the story of what happened after. About the human that stopped the bad humans. That was when Riolu decided that protecting can't be done alone. He refused to go back to the relocation site and decided to wait for the human. "Let's be heroes, partner." Riolu took the human's hand, and that's when their journey began. A very painful and exhausting journey. The Pokemon thought humans were fragile creatures, but his human was something else. Riolu found that out the hard way. Time for our first day of training. His human had released him from his Pokeball, and Riolu saw numerous fallen trees and scattered rubble. Two groups of wild Pokemon got into a territory war here and wrecked the place. His trainer pointed to a pile of scattered branches. "Your training will be gathering branches and rocks and pile them over there." His trainer pointed at a small pit. "This will be good training to hit every muscle in your body and loosen them up." Riolu wasted no time and began. An hour later, the only thing remaining scattered in the area was the large trees. With his strength, he knew he couldn't lift them. Knowing one's limit was taught to him by his father. For the second part of your training, we will be honing your combat instinct. Riolu wondered how his human would train him to do that. "We will be sparring." Riolu tilted his head in confusion. Then his confusion turned into terror as his trainer's fingers dug into a log and proceeded to throw it at him. Riolu had more branches to clean tomorrow. Steven sat down and got comfortable before pressing something on his computer and joining a video meeting. "The big man finally decided to grace us with his presence," Sydney grumbled. "Hush, Sydney, he's just in time," Glacia spoke up. The Elite Four and the current gym leaders of Hone were all in the meeting, and the reason for such a meeting was obvious. The next conference is already starting soon. "How is everyone holding up?" Steven asked. "Preparations are going quite smoothly this year since we have fewer troubling situations to intervene in," Winona mentioned. "I agree. Last year, I opened my gym to challengers pretty late since I needed to deal with a group of poachers," Watson added. "I assume you're referring to the sudden appearance of those bounty hunters," Moore asked. "I heard they registered for this year's conference. They'll be a good challenge for my granddaughter's adjustments to taking over the gym. I haven't met them yet, but I'd like to thank them for taking care of some poachers in my area a few days ago," Norman said. A few others agreed. And as the meeting continued, and they discussed all the necessary details, Sydney and Drake brought up a topic. "We need to proceed with the rehab program soon." The rehab program, where Pokemon owned by criminals are assessed if they are worth being given a second chance. It's not rare for a Pokemon to commit crimes under the order of their trainer. Some do it fully aware that it was a crime, while others either had no choice or didn't know any better. In the rehab program, these Pokemon would be observed in the first week to determine how they interact with other Pokemon in the rehab center. Overly aggressive Pokemon are directly sent to the detention center, where they are kept in their Pokeball at all times, only coming out for meals and scheduled observations. Pokemon determined to be redeemable would be observed more carefully, and if they pass, they would either be released or be handed down to gym trainers under the Pokemon League. The problem they were currently having was that due to the increase of apprehended criminals, the rehab center was overpopulated, and most of their gym trainers scheduled to receive a Pokemon was still under training. I'm lost as well. Steven rubbed his chin in thought. Can they be arranged to be released instead? We've already released the ones determined to be harmless, but there is still a surplus, and the only ones with a stamp to be released are the problematic ones, Drake explained. The Pokemon he was referring were the ones that were sent to the detention center first, and were only given a second chance after strict guidance. These Pokemon were not allowed to be released in the wild, and were given to newly recruited gym trainers, who were already experienced trainers that had at least one conference worth of experience. That was an important protocol since most of these Pokemon only respond well to trainers that are actually strong and won't back down against them. Would any of you like to volunteer? Steven asked everyone else in the meeting. Me and Drake have already taken the Dark and Dragon types, Sydney informed them. The majority of them nodded, volunteering to take in Pokemon from the rehab center, except more. I would have to refuse. I'm currently in the process handing down the gym, so a volatile fire type would be too much at the moment. Don't worry more. We understand your situation. Steven nodded, with a few others voicing their understanding. I have a suggestion, Phoebe spoke up. What about the bounty hunters? I've seen their files, Roxanne responded. They're registered as new trainers, but it said they're from a region called Japan, which is not part of the league. Maybe they have experience training Pokemon, Brawley reasoned. This time Norman spoke up. But that brings up the question of where are the mentioned Pokemon? May I speak? Winona got everyone's attention. As you may know, I traveled a lot before becoming a gym leader. She received several nods. During my travels, I have been to regions with history of war, similarly to the war between Kanto and Johto a decade ago. The older members of the meeting grimaced. It is common for soldiers to be only given temporary Pokemon during their participation in the war. Disposable Pokemon, so they called it. How does that relate to bounty hunters? Tate asked. They're young like us, Lisa finished. Steven sighed. Believe it or not, those two young trainers are war veterans, drafted at the age of 16. Several gasps were heard. How do you know that, Steven? Juan asked. They arrived in this region as a group. One person in that group is working in the regional Pokemon lab under Professor Birch. The group doesn't seem to hide it as well, since even the nurses in the Pokemon Center they stayed at were aware, Steven explained. How horrible. Glacia mumbled. But how does Winona know? I've met one person from their group, the flying-type gym leader answered. With that question answered, a quick discussion happened, and everyone agreed that two bounty hunters would be contacted to arrange a deal. Katsuki smirked at his trainer profile. Katsuki Bakugu, Japan. Age 1804. Badges 0. Conferences 0. Current team roster. Growlithe 2. Quick summary of trainer. A newly arrived trainer in Hone, with no prior record in other league-affiliated regions. He has a rather blunt and aggressive attitude. Currently works as a bounty hunter across the region, mostly targeting poachers with a high price on their head. Note: rather volatile. Choosing to ignore the latter parts. Katsuki was quite smug at the fact that his Pokemon was promoted to rank 2 after his recent battle with other trainers. Then Katsuki made the wrong choice of looking up Izuku's profile. His eyes twitched. Class, a group chat. King Explosion Murder. Deku. I'm going to kill you. Small Might. Why? What did I do? Chargeabolt. I gotta see this. King Explosion Murder. You were hiding something from me. Small might. Do you know how little that narrows it down? King explosion murder. Urge. Being back in Little Root Town made Izuku remember how much they were struggling a few months ago. They were forced to adjust to a new world after being a casualty in the war. Lost their powers in the process of being transferred, and had no way of getting home at all. I'm not even sure if this chance can even be considered lucky, Izuku muttered as wandered around the area. The town was livelier compared to when he was last here. Considering that it was during the middle of the league, it was understandable. Now that the league would be starting again, more people began to gather here again. Momo mentioned that Ash Ketchum was at the lab a week ago, which meant he should be on his way Oldale Town if the timeline of the anime was accurate. Izuku would preferably want to avoid him since Ash was more a trouble magnet than him of all people. And that was saying something. Izuku? The young man turned around to see a familiar face. Nadia was waving at him. She was dressed in a blue nurse uniform, with a Chansey standing beside her. In front of her was a blue-haired young woman on a wheelchair. It's been a while, Nadia-san. Yes, it has. This is a lie. I'm taking care of her as her private nurse. It's nice to meet you, Eli spoke up. A pleasure to meet you as well, Izuku replied with a smile. I didn't know you were a nurse, Nadia-san. I actually used to be a nurse in the Pokemon Center when I first met you. Now Eli's family hired me to be her caretaker. Miss Nadia, best nurse in the town. So my parents didn't pick anyone else, Eli said proudly. I agree, Izuku nodded. By the way, did you just move into this town? Izuku and his friends had stayed in Little Root for at least 2 months. But Izuku had never seen the girl before. Eli shook her head. No, we've been living here for years. I was just afraid of leaving the house, Eli answered. Actually, my dream is to travel, but... She looked down at her legs that were covered by a blanket. Izuku noticed Nadia had a somber look on her face. Don't mind that. You can still achieve your dream if you want to. Izuku placed a hand on the girl's head. I mean, there's a lot of Pokemon out there that can help you. Some fly, teleport, and some can carry you on their back. I don't want to be a burden to the Pokemon. You won't be, Izuku assured. Some Pokemon don't like battling at all and prefer to just be a companion. I know a region where a lot of Pokemon there don't battle, and instead wants to be mounts. Really? Yes, the region is called Alola, Izuku revealed. Izuku smiled when Eli's expression brightened somewhat. After a few minutes more of talking, they went on their separate ways. Since there was no league currently ongoing, there was no free lodging at the Pokemon Center, so Izuku had to stay at a hotel. Once he was in his room, he got to meet the newest addition to his team. Trico came out of its Pokeball, stretching a bit as it looked around the new environment. Nice to meet you, I'm Izuku. He kneeled down so that he was eye level with Trico. I probably should have met you first in the Pokemon lab, but Momo practically threw me out after our battle. Trico didn't react much. Well, she already informed me that you didn't mind coming with me on my journey. Still, I want to make sure. Trico smiled and nodded to confirm that he wanted to come. Great. Then you should meet our other friend. Izuku released Riolu from its Pokeball. Izuku observed his two Pokemon's interaction, as they seemed to be introducing themselves to each other. Trico seemed to be on calm-minded and patient type, since the rest of time they were in the hotel. He only sat by the window. Izuku clapped his hands loudly, getting the two Pokemon's attention. Time for training. Riolu paled, while Trico looked confused at the reaction. Oh, having a non-league affiliated trainer get a Pokemon from the rehab center is new, Professor Birch said as he received the email from Drake, one of the Elite Four. Isn't that the place where the Pokemon owned by criminals are sent? Brendan asked. The criminals with life sentences, but yes, Nigel replied to his son. It's no secret that the justice system puts down heavy punishments on guilty criminals, most of them getting life sentences. Nigel's expression darkened, knowing full well that those people often don't live long after the sentence. "I'll be stepping out of the lab for a bit," Nigel informed his assistant, and approached the person who might know where the trainer he was looking for was. Broken Bones Online. "You. Come to the cafe in front of the Pokemon Center." Broken Bones. "Why?" "You. Just come here." Broken Bones. "Okay." Izuku returned his phone in his pocket and dropped the log he was holding. "I guess that's enough training for now," Izuku announced, and Ryalu dropped to the ground in exhaustion. Trico was panting heavily after maintaining Quick Attack active for as long as possible. Izuku returned them both to their Pokeballs before sprinting to where Momo wanted to meet as his own training. Normally, people would think something was wrong if they received a text like that. But he and his friends already discussed that for emergencies, only sending a location would suffice. That was something they all agreed on after the stain incident in Hasu. He arrived at the cafe, where Momo waved him towards their table, where Professor Nigel Birch was waiting with her. "Hello, Professor. It's nice to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about your work as a bounty hunter. Good things, I hope." Catching criminals is always a good thing. Izuku grimaced at the naive way of thinking, even if there was a chance that the man was just showing pleasantries. "May I ask why you wanted to meet me?" "Momo just asked me to come here." "I didn't know why either," Momo spoke up. "It's because the League wanted to ask if you would like to obtain a Pokemon from the Rehab Center." Rehab Center. A place like that was never mentioned in the games nor the anime. But something called a Rehab Center did ease Izuku's mind a bit. At least some are getting second chances in life. It's a place where Pokemon previously owned by criminals are sent to see if they could be given another chance. Normally, Pokemon sent there are either released or handed to trainers working for the League. "Quite the impressive process," Momo commented. "But why give me a chance?" "You see, in the Rehab Center, there are Pokemon that are sent to the detention center due to their aggressive and volatile nature. These Pokemon are still given a chance after strict guidance and observation, but are only allowed to be handed down to experienced trainers," Professor Birch explained. "Then Izuku will be given a chance to pick from those Pokemon?" Momo asked, and the professor nodded. "That's not all. Since such a Pokemon would be hard to handle, you will also be receiving monthly compensation for the duration of the conference." Izuku rubbed his chin in thought. It was a good offer, but suddenly getting a new member when he just got Trico might cause a few issues. Then again, Izuku was not new to training multiple individuals at once. "I accept." "Great. I will inform the Rehab Center, and they will prepare a suitable contract after you choose a Pokemon." "Damn. This reminds me of Tartarus Bakubro," Kirishima commented as they entered the Rehab Center. "They have Pokemon that practically have multiple quirks here. This is the bare minimum," Katsuki grumbled. The Rehab Center building was a fucking fortress. The only way in was through the move teleport, and upon arrival a group of psychic-type Pokemon would check if you were clean. The walls were made of materials that even Katsuki couldn't figure out, but it felt like he was being weakened. "You must be the volatile one." An old man wearing a pirate costume greeted Katsuki and Kirishima. Katsuki's eyes twitched, but didn't say anything. "Follow me." They were led to a meeting room that had several different types of Pokeballs lined up on the table. The old man handed Katsuki a folder. "You can choose from any of those Pokemon. Then we would give you an appropriate contract for taking care of it," the old man explained. "Your friend here has also been approved to take a Pokemon if he chooses to." "Manly," Kirishima grinned. In the folder, Katsuki found documents about the Pokemon he could choose from. All of them were Fire-type Pokemon, and all criminal activities they were involved with included arson. There were some with special conditions, like a pair of Quilavas that were not allowed to be chosen together. Katsuki was given permission to take at most 2 Pokemon, so he wanted the best of the bunch. From the files, the ones that stuck out to him the most were the two Qulavas that belonged to criminals who were brothers and were locked up for burning down a forest. There was also a Houndoom that also burned down a forest. What's with all the fucking forests being burned down? Katsuki muttered, while Kirishima had already chosen his Pokemon, a Carkol. Katsuki's other options were a Chandelure, Fletchinder, Pyroar, and Camerupt, none of which had anything special about them. He chose the two Pokemon that caught his interest. Izuku never thought he would experience teleportation, but here he was, standing beside an Alakazam, waiting to be teleported to the rehab center. From what little Izuku found out, the rehab center was on an island where only high-ranking officials knew the location. Even in terms of the psychic type, Pokemon used to teleport in and out of the island. The Pokemon may know the location, but the trainer wouldn't if they didn't have the clearance for the information. So strict. Even worse than Tartaros, Izuku muttered. The teleportation was a quick process, and within a second, Izuku was already in a different place. You seem less surprised than the first two, Drake said, getting Izuku's attention. It takes a lot to surprise me now, Izuku responded as the man began leading him down the hallway. Read through this, Drake handed Izuku a folder. The files listed everything Izuku needed to know about the Pokemon he would be choosing from. All the crimes they were involved in, and everything that happened during their time in the rehab center. The only Pokemon that stood out to Izuku was the Quilava. It was mentioned that it had a brother, but the file wasn't included in the folder handed to him. That meant either it was already taken, or still under surveillance. Several notes were written on the file. The Quilava was said to be powerful and very aggressive. It barely passed the rehab center's test, and still had a red mark on its file. The other Quilava was taken by the other mercenary, Drake mentioned, making Izuku raise an eyebrow. If Katsuki had the other Quilava, it's likely that they'll meet, and it will be the only chance that this one would see its brother again. Well, it's not like the other ones are appealing to me, Izuku shrugged, deciding to take the Quilava. Once they arrived at the room with the Pokemon, Izuku was handed an Ultra Ball. The Pokeball burst open to release the Quilava that immediately growled at Izuku with flames blazing on its back. Drake didn't expect much from the mercenaries. After seeing the first two that came, he doubted the other one would be much better. It was standard procedure to release the Pokemon before handing over ownership, in order to judge their reaction. As he had expected, the Quilava immediately showed hostility towards the blonde mercenary. Although the Pokemon didn't resort to violence, Drake doubted that the two would cooperate anytime soon. The Houndoom was less aggressive, but definitely wasn't happy either. The Carkol just accepted its fate with the red-haired teen. Probably the best outcome he'll see anytime soon. Now, the Quilava was openly growling at the green-haired mercenary. This one was more violent than its brother, so Drake prepared to step in. What he didn't expect was for the teen to show the coldest glare he had ever seen in his life. The flames on the Pokemon's back were snuffed out and made it step back. As a veteran, he recognized that look immediately. The look of a person that stood in the front lines. The vanguard of the war. There might be some hope for this after all. Quilava was returned to its Pokeball, and now Izuku waited for a contract to be handed to him. Having 3 Pokemon to start his journey wasn't so bad. The first gym leader he would most likely face would be either Norman or Roxanne. With 2 weeks left before the league began, he'd have to focus on training Trico and having Quilava adjust to the team. Sorry to keep you waiting, a woman dressed in an office attire handed Izuku the contract. In summary, it informed him that he will receive 10,000 credits every month for the duration of the conference. There would be a regular checkup to see if Quilava adjusted well under his care. Once everything was taken care of, Izuku was teleported back to Little Root Town. Time for lunch. Quickly making his way to the market to buy, Izuku picked out specific food for each of his Pokemon. protein and iron-rich food for Ryalu, a high-meat diet with a few berries for Trico, and a bunch of meat for Quilava. Izuku had been surprised by Trico's preferences, expecting the Pokemon to be more into plant-based food. Now, Izuku understands why Mega Skeptile is a dragon type. When it was finally time to eat, Izuku noticed that even Quilava was calmly eating. He was honestly expecting a ruckus, but the fire type probably wouldn't have been allowed out the rehab center if it was that unstable. Izuku gave them a while to rest before calling all of them to start training. Specifically, he wanted to test how strong Quilava was. I want to know how strong you are at the moment, so we're going to have a spar. Quilava turned to where Ryalu and Trico was. You're not fighting them. Izuku cracked his knuckles. You're fighting me. With one powerful step, Izuku already closed the distance between them. Quilava stumbled back in surprise and received a punch in the gut. I expected more from you, Izuku taunted. Quilava growled and flames erupted all over its body. It charged towards Izuku, but was easily swatted away by a backhand. Quilava used Ember, but the flames barely did anything to Izuku. You need to learn a better special fire attack, Izuku commented. Quilava used Flame Charge once again, but Izuku simply stopped the Pokemon in its tracks and slammed it hard to the ground. That's enough for now. Quilava tried to get up as the look of disbelief rested on its face. Ryalu patted the fire type on the back. Come on, Izuku called out as he blocked a strike from Ryalu and sent him tumbling down to the ground. Then he ducked down to avoid Trico and grabbed the wood gecko's leg and tossed him towards a charging Quilava. All three of his Pokemon were down on the ground, but that didn't mean they hadn't improved in the past 2 weeks. They lasted an hour longer compared to their last spar, so that was something. We're done for today, so get a lot of rest tonight, Izuku announced, and his Pokemon weakly groaned in acknowledgement. Tomorrow is the last day before League starts. We'll be showing everyone just how strong all of you are, Izuku said before returning all of them to their Pokeball. After dropping them off at the Pokemon Center, Izuku decided to go for a quick walk. As the League was about to start, all the trainers were already flocking towards the gyms. Little Root became a lot quieter again. The air feels a bit humid, Izuku muttered. Since he was quite close to the Pokemon Center, he wasn't quite bothered about being caught in the rain. But as the raindrops began to fall, he remembered that he wasn't staying at the Pokemon Center. Fuck. Izuku began running towards the hotel he was staying at. The rain began pouring harder, and Izuku had given up on running through the rain and just walked. Rough day, another person that was soaked in the rain asked. The person had a tan skin and spiky ash blonde hair. The red tracksuit they were wearing was soaked, and Izuku really wondered how their hair kept being spiky. Not really, Izuku replied. They walked in silence towards the hotel. Upon arrival, an employee handed them towels. I'm sorry, but we don't have any available rooms at the moment, the receptionist informed the person that arrived with him. The next checkout is in 3 hours, but I'm not sure if they might extend their time due to the weather. Shit, can't I have at least a place to take a shower? The receptionist didn't know what to say. Hey, you can't take a shower in my room if you want, Izuku offered. Both people looked at him in surprise. You got balls, dude, the blonde smirked. All right, lead the way. Izuku didn't know why the receptionist was blushing, but he just went to the elevator to head to his room since he needed a shower too. The room wasn't anything special. It was just an average room with one bed, a sofa, a desk, and one bathroom. You can go in first, Izuku offered. Nah, you go first. I need to get my clothes ready first, the blonde replied. Izuku nodded and went to the cabinet to get a towel. He glanced back at his guest just as they zipped down their tracksuit. Asterisk boing asterisk. Izuku sputtered as tits even bigger than Momo's was released from their confines. She glanced back at him. What? She asked with a smirk on her face. I thought you were a guy. She cupped her breasts. Not with these babies. Izuku blushed. I'm heading in now. He rushed towards the bathroom, immediately getting in the shower and turning on the hot water. Izuku began rethinking his life choices. He may have gotten used to women on the level of having a normal conversation, but Izuku was far from being able to handle being alone with one he didn't know in a room. He was a goddamn virgin, for fuck's sake. Being in a war with all for one didn't leave any room for personal relationships. Asterisk click asterisk. Izuku froze at the sound of a door opening. The shower had a glass door separating it from the rest of the bathroom, and with the glass wet, the other side was blurred. But Izuku saw a silhouette enter the bathroom and began to walk closer. It was nice of you to offer me a shower. The voice sounded a lot more feminine now that he knew the other person was a woman. I honestly thought you offered it just to score a chance to sleep with me, the silhouette shrugged. I didn't know you were a woman. The door opened to reveal the woman's naked form. Doesn't mean you don't get to score, big guy. She closed the glass door behind her. Let's enjoy the night, Tilda. Itsuka crushed the mug she was holding. You good? The client she was modeling for asked. Yeah. Just felt the urge to strangle someone, Itsuka replied. Her client looked at her in confusion. Momo snapped a metal pipe she was holding onto in half. The researchers around her flinched and looked at her in fear. Setsuna crushed the apple she was in her hands. Someone's getting touchy, she muttered. Kyoka suddenly stabbed a hole through her notebook while writing a song. Something wrong, Kyoka? Her manager asked. All good, Candace, Kyoka replied. Just felt off beat for a second. Izuku's eyes snapped open. He looked around the bed to find nobody with him. Sighing in relief, Izuku got up and began contemplating his life. He had just lost his V card, and he didn't even know her name. He felt like an asshole. Oh God, I've become a villain. Izuku moped for a few more hours before finally having the strength to pack his stuff and head out to go get his Pokemon at the Pokemon Center. There was huge commotion at the Pokemon Center, and Izuku honestly felt like coming back later. But a familiar voice called out to him. Izuku. The young hero stopped in his tracks and turned around to find a dear friend. And Melissa? Melissa Shield rushed towards him and jumped into his arms. You're alive. How did you get here? Izuku asked. That's a long story. Melissa scratched her cheek. We have all the time in the world now, Izuku replied with a smile. How did you make that sound like a proposal? Melissa giggled. Excuse me? A nurse grabbed their attention. Oh, Melissa ran back into the Pokemon Center, and Izuku followed her with a confused look. Inside the Pokemon Center, a bunch of Pokemon were caught in nets. I guess you literally caught them the old-fashioned way, Izuku commented. Should I just? Yes, just rip them. They'll go back to their portable mode when damaged, Melissa replied. Izuku proceeded to just rip the nets with his bare hands and watched as the nets shriveled up into a metal ball. Does that count as a pokeball? Izuku grinned at Melissa. She just pinched his shoulder. With everything taken care of, Izuku and Melissa went to a cafe to talk. How'd it happen? Melissa bit her lip. Well, after you died. The government tried to find a way to pass down one for all, she began, and Izuku's expression darkened. They injected your blood to different people, but one for all rejected them all. Was the war still not over? It was, but the government just didn't want to let go of such an asset, she replied. They stored your body in a lab, so I wanted to do something about it. Did you? I didn't die, Melissa assured, figuring out where he was leading up to. When I got close and touched your body, one for all transferred to me. Then in a flash of light, she gestured around her. That doesn't assure me. I look fine, right? More than fine, Izuku smirked. One more wise crack and we're heading for a hotel, Melissa countered. Izuku blushed and looked away. Melissa's eyes narrowed. She gasped. No. You already got a job? Izuku looked at Melissa in shock. Yes. I got the position of head researcher in Devon. Melissa showed Izuku her new employee ID. They really liked my portable shelters. Melissa held up a cube. Damn. Consider my gift for your journey. Melissa handed Izuku the cube. Try to stay out of trouble. You know I'm going to get involved in something the moment I step out those gates. I know. Both of them laughed before saying their goodbyes and going their separate ways. Among the 3 Pokemon under Izuku's care, only one of them decided to travel outside their Pokeball, which was Quilava. Izuku wondered if it was because he had spent most of his time in rehab inside a Pokeball, so now he wanted to be outside as much as possible. By the way, pal, I wanted to ask a question. Quilava let out a low growl in response. Were you born in Sinnoh? Quilava shook his head. That one answer confirmed something for Izuku. If Quilava had been born in Sinnoh, he would have evolved into a Hisuian variant, instead of the more commonly known variant from Johto. When Izuku was near the exit of the town, he saw some familiar faces. Nadia was with Alai, and it seemed she was helping her get on a carriage. Need some help? Izuku approached them. Oh, Izuku. That would be greatly appreciated. Izuku lifted Alai along with her wheelchair with ease and placed her on the carriage. Wow, you're really strong, Alai said amazement. Thanks. I work out a lot. That was an understatement. Izuku inspected the carriage and looked impressed. It was an open carriage with a body made completely out of metal and the interior furnished with rugs and cushions. There was also a storage compartment on the back, and the whole thing was covered by a roof with solar panels to block the sun. This looks expensive. It is, Nadia nodded in confirmation. Her father spared no expense to make sure his daughter traveled in comfort, while getting the experience of being out in the world. Izuku glanced at the front of the cart where the straps were empty. What's going to be pulling this? We got a Taurus from Alola, Eli said excitedly. Nadia tossed a Pokeball, and a Taurus that was already wearing straps came out. We just need to strap him up, and we'll be ready to go. I'll do it, Izuku said as he approached the Tauros who already positioned itself at the front of the cart. Were you guy waiting for someone? Eli nodded. Yes, we're waiting for my senpai. Who's that? Izuku asked as he was connecting the straps. She's a Pokemon trainer that just came back from Johto. The Orange Islands to be specific, I think. Nadia was the one to answer. She offered to accompany Eli on her travels and challenge the league at the same time. That's nice. It's fun traveling with friends, Izuku commented. I'm surprised your father didn't just hire a bodyguard considering how rich your family is. Eli looked down. I'm sorry. Did I say something wrong? Izuku asked in concern. It's just that experienced trainers won't take jobs like that when being a trainer under league pays the same with a lot more benefits. Like already trained Pokemon, Nadia explained. Thinking about it, Izuku realized how beneficial it was to work under the Pokemon League. He glanced at Quilava, who was lying down under a tree. I'm sorry for saying something insensitive, Izuku bowed. It's all right. Getting a certificate to be able to distribute Pokemon is practically impossible anyways, Eli mentioned. So, it's no surprise people would want to work for the league than some random people. Izuku got an idea. Why don't I act as security as well? I'm going to try challenging the league as well anyways. But your actions would be limited, Nadia said. You don't have to trouble yourself for us, Mr. Izuku, Eli added. It's no problem. It'll help me out as well anyways. Are you sure? I don't know if you're aware, but traveling by carriage is harder than on foot, Nadia began explaining. More wild Pokemon get attracted, and more issues often happen. That's even more of a reason for me to go with you, Izuku replied. And that will be good training. Right, Quilava? Quilava just let out a small flare of fire on its head, while laying down as a response. He's quite the character, Nadia commented. I read that that's how fire types use the F word, Eli whispered. Izuku turned to them in confusion. They do that? Izuku recalled several times where Quilava did that during training. Looks like Evrio, an energetic voice yelled out to them, only to abruptly stop. My senpai, Eli exclaimed. Izuku turned to where Eli was looking and froze. We weren't supposed to meet each other again, Mai whispered as she sat on the driver's seat and was guiding the Toros. That's how one-night stands work. I didn't plan this, and I didn't know anything about that. It was my first time, Izuku replied. It was my first time too, but you don't see me complaining, Mai responded. But you are complaining. Mai glared at him. Now we have to do it again, she stated flatly. What? Why? It's an unspoken rule, Mai answered as if it was common knowledge. Where the hell did you hear that from? Just man up and be prepared when we arrive at Oldale Town. Why are we having this conversation here? Why are you two acting like ex-lovers? Nadia asked, leaning between them. Gah, we're not, Mai exclaimed. So you two are lovers? Eli asked with sparkling eyes. No, we just met the other day, Mai denied immediately. Wow. Love at first sight. Eli got more excited as Nadia giggled. Izuku was just frozen stiff the whole conversation. Let's set up our camp here for now, Mai announced as they stopped the carriage in a clearing. They had traveled for exactly 4 hours and decided to rest to have lunch and let the Toros rest. Nadia opened a compartment on the side of the carriage and pulled out an attached grill. Could any of you gather some firewood? Nadia asked. So Izuku volunteered. Maybe after this. I'll buy one of those, Izuku muttered as he released Quilava before entering the forest. Looking around, Izuku began to appreciate how peaceful it actually was. In all honesty, Izuku hasn't experienced any major trouble at all. No big bads or heavy burden on his shoulders. He no longer needed to carry the weight of the world on his back. This feels nice. Izuku looked up at the sky with a big smile. It's good not being the protagonist. Quilava stared at him like he was crazy. This shrimp is coming with us? Kyoka asked as Momo arrived with a kid tailing right behind her. Kyoka didn't know much about the Gen 3 series as her preference was more on the 6th generation. But Momo kept her notified enough to know that the kid following her was one of the game's protagonists. Yes, this is Brendan Birch. Kyoka, the punk girl replied. The rival instead of the protagonist, Kyoka thought. Shall we head out now? Momo asked. Kyoka nodded, so they made their way out of the city. The first thing Kyoka noted was how the kid followed Momo like a lost puppy. He was quiet and just silently followed behind her, occasionally glancing at her as well. She mentally laughed at the fact that the kid had a crush on her friend. Though he felt bad knowing that Momo wouldn't feel the same way since she liked Greenie. Kyoka liked him too, but Momo had a better chance at getting him. She knew Greenie had a thing for tits after all. This looks like a good enough place. Momo stopped and called out a Pokemon. What Kyoka hadn't expected was for the Pokemon to be a giant steel snake. When did you get a Steelix? Kyoka asked in shock. I caught her as an Onyx and bought a metal coat using my bonus at the lab, Momo explained as she climbed up her Pokemon. I did the trade evolution with Itsuka, she added before finishing with a quiet. I still don't know how that's a thing. Uh-huh. As Kyoka tried to process everything, the kid was already singing praises. You're so amazing, Miss Momo. Kyoka sighed. Kyoka Jiru, Japan. Age 1808-01. Badges, 0. Conferences, 0. Current team roster. Noibat 1. Wismer 1. Momo Yaoyarazu, Japan. Age 1809-23. Badges, 0. Conferences, 0. Current team roster. Mawile 3. Steelix 3. Skarmory 2. What's this called? My asked as Izuku handed them all a bowl of katsudon. It's called katsudon, Izuku answered. After washing the rice, I cooked it in the pot, then scrambled some eggs to put between the rice and the meat. Izuku was thankful normal animals were still a thing here. I'm surprised you know how to cook, Izuku, Nadia commented as they began eating. Yeah, you'd think his wife would be cooking for him every day to keep him home. Mai laughed and Izuku began to look at them in horror. I'm not married, Izuku revealed, making all three women choked on their food. Then they looked at him in disbelief. You guys thought I was married. He hesitantly glanced at Mai. Izuku, it's harder to believe you're not married, Nadia spoke up. Especially with how reliable you are. Izuku's eyes narrowed at Mai. Did you also think I was married? Mai looked away and continued to eat. But weren't you guys teasing me with Mai? Well, having more than one wife isn't rare, Izuku, Nadia informed him. I have 2 moms, Eli told him. Follow me, Izuku. Nadia stood up and brought her bowl along with her. Izuku followed her until they were a good distance away from the other 2. I ignored it at first. But you're really naive about common knowledge, Izuku. Why is that? It's just that the region I originally lived didn't practice those kinds of relationships. Izuku scratched the back of his head as he tried to explain. You mentioned once that you were a soldier, Izuku nodded. Then surely you know that after a war, the number of males drastically decreased, right? I'm aware, Adding the fact that this is a world where Pokemon can easily kill a person puts the decline steeper. Well, if you put it that way. Izuku was surprised by Nadia suddenly hugging him. Every day, I worry about my son that's out there somewhere, Izuku, he heard her sniffling. But I can't stomp on his dream. Izuku didn't reply and just hugged her back. He didn't know how the conversation went this direction, but it would be insensitive of him to point it out. It was a bit awkward when they separated, so they just went back to the camp to resume eating. Mai tried to ask what they talked about, but it would be weird to say Nadia was explaining to him the declining population to justify having more than one wife, then suddenly mentioned missing her son. Then Izuku gasped, and he whipped towards Nadia, who quickly looked away. Women are scary. With the league starting up again, Izuku decided to finally begin some complicated training for his team. In the past months that he had been in this world, Izuku did a lot of research about Pokemon and how they use their moves in battle or in their everyday life. He had seen water types sprinkle water to take care of plants, then use that same ability to fire a blast of water strong enough to tear down walls. Pokemon were essentially people that had more than one quirk in Izuku's eyes. You could even say that their types were their quirks, and their physiology acted as the mutations to properly use their quirks. Izuku noticed this when he saw Pokemon use moves in a way that didn't really make sense. The easiest example would be Quick Attack. A lot of Pokemon used this move, and most of them used it the same way. They charged forward with incredible speed, and it acted in a way that Pokemon didn't even need to touch the ground. It was as if they were being propelled forward by the energy, like how Float worked when powered by One for All. With all of that in mind, Izuku wanted to train his Pokemon to make moves of their own. He studied each species and noted each of his Pokemon's preferred ways of fighting during each of their spars. To start off, Riolu's species had the ability to use Aura, which was basically mystical energy separate from their type energy used by Pokemon. Normally, Riolu would only gain access to such an ability after evolving. But Izuku had experience controlling a power that's dormant and foreign at the same time. Here's what I want you to do, buddy. Izuku pointed at Riolu's chest. I want you to try and imagine a blue sun trapped in your chest. Then try to feel its warmth and spread towards your whole body. Riolu nodded and began meditating. With this training, Riolu should gain earlier access to Aura and use special attacks earlier as well. Their species were strong physical attackers, but inherently better special attackers. That made Izuku's end goal to make Ryalu, and his other two Pokemon, be able to use physical and special attacks at the same time. Next up was Trico. Izuku had already trained Trico to use Quick Attack for as long as possible, and the Wood Gecko's record was a whole 2 hours straight. But keeping it active as long as possible wasn't the goal. What Izuku wanted for Trico to be able to use the move subconsciously, like how he trained to use Black Whip and Air Force under Endeavor. The next step would be to add Trico's Grass-type energy to the attack. What I want you to do is to try to use Leafage while having Quick Attack active, but only keep Leafage in the state before being active. Trico looked at Izuku in confusion. It's like when you're trying to throw a punch, but instead of throwing it immediately, you just keep it in the state winding up. That explanation didn't seem to help much, but Trico got the idea he was trying to say. Quilava's training would be quite simple, but it would take a lot of patience to pull off. Among all of Izuku's current Pokemon, Quilava was the one that liked to attack head-on the most, which didn't make sense when his species were primarily physical attackers. Izuku had a solution though, and it was thanks to an old friend. Quilava's species had the ability to easily combust their whole body into flames. Even all their physical attacks involved lighting up their whole body into flames. So what's stopping them from firing blasts of flames from any part of their body? You think you can ignite flames from your fur? Izuku asked, making his tone somewhat doubtful. Quilava narrowed his eyes at Izuku. I'd understand if you couldn't do it. A tick mark appeared on Quilava's face. I guess it can't be helped. Quilava literally exploded before marching off to do what Izuku instructed. A little more, and I'll be calling him Kaken. Izuku laughed before making his way back to the camp where the others were resting. It seemed like they all had their Pokemon out and were in the middle of feeding them. Nadia only had a single Pokemon, a Chansey. Eli had an Eevee and an Espurr eating beside her. Mai had a whole team of 6 Pokemon around her. Considering that she isn't a character shown in either the anime or the games, Izuku was curious about her team. Right beside her was a Swampert. Across from her, a Granbull was munching down on its food with a Ledian leaning beside it. Sitting by a log, a Kangaskhan and Marowak ate some berries, while a Matrix circled around the group. She had a fairly well-balanced team, which made him wonder if she had other Pokemon. He heard that Mai had been a trainer for a few years, participating in the Home League for her first year, and taking on the Orange Islands for her second year. If every trainer was like Ash Ketchum, she might have a whole other set of Pokemon in a ranch. Are you done with training? Nadia asked. No, my Pokemon are still training, Izuku replied as he took a seat near where Tauros was resting. They had planned to rest for 4 hours to give Tauros more time to rest and get a more adventure-like experience on this journey. What was the point of going on a journey when you just stayed at a Pokemon Center every night after all? A few minutes later, they began to feel the ground shaking. An earthquake? Izuku looked around in confusion. A large Pokemon or a big group is passing by. Mai yelled and her Pokemon got ready to fight. Then in the distance, Izuku noticed a large metallic creature heading towards them. His Pokemon were in the middle of training, and calling them back would take time. So he stepped forward himself. Hey, get back! Mai yelled at him as her Swampert marched to the front. Izuku felt a bit awkward before stepping back. As the Pokemon was getting closer, they saw a green flag being raised and Izuku noticed everyone began to relax. Mai's Pokemon backed off, went back to her side. Izuku looked at them in confusion. A green flag means they're only using the Pokemon as transportation and no intention of battling, Nadia explained, noticing his confusion. I should really start reading about rules and regulations, Izuku muttered. Ah, that's the new Singer earphone jack, Eli exclaimed. Izuku turned back to the approaching Pokemon and saw 2 familiar faces. Well, what do we have here? Kyoka looked at Izuku with a smirk on her face. Ah, Momo suddenly gasped, getting everyone's attention. Your eyes met. You know what that means? Everyone else was completely confused about what was happening. But Izuku's eyes began twitching. Asterisk a few months ago asterisk. Izuku, Momo, and Kyoka were heading back to the town when Izuku made eye contact with a kid holding a butterfly net. For some reason, Izuku immediately turned away and shielded his eyes. What are you doing, Greenie? Kyoka asked in confusion. Avoiding eye contact to not start a battle, Izuku replied. Kyoka and Momo shared a look. Asterisk present asterisk. Very funny, Izuku grumbled. Then he noticed the third person on the Steelix. Momo and Kyoka got off the Steelix. But the moment the third person in their group stepped on the grass, an explosion rang out in the distance. Izuku turned to Kyoka and Momo. You brought the curse, he said before dashing towards the direction of the explosion. What's going on? Eli asked in confusion as Izuku ran away. We'll stay here, Eli, Mai stated. There must a battle going on out there. If it's a battle between wild Pokemon, we'll be leaving immediately, Nadia spoke up. We might get caught up in a territory fight, we stay. I'll go after Izuku, Momo said. I'll stay here just in case, Kyoka added. As Momo ran towards the forest, Brendan followed her. But Kyoka grabbed his arm to stop him. Why are you stopping me? You're staying here, kid, Kyoka said firmly. But Miss Mo, shut it, Kyoka glared at him. You're a kid, not a hero. Nobody said a word. Izuku stopped in front of a clearing where a group of people wearing blue and white pirate-themed clothes were gathered. It was a bit of an unusual scene with a group of trainers being cornered by the pirate group. Izuku took note of the Pokemon out on the field, most of which were water types like Corphish, Quagsire, and Golduck. They weren't the standard Pokemon Team Aqua had in the games, but this world is a reality now. Izuku should even expect them to have Pokemon that aren't water types. Skarmory, cover us, Momo called out her Pokemon. Next, she grabbed a metal stick from her belt and whipped her wrist to open it up into a bow staff. This chick thinks she can hurt our Pokemon with a stick, one of the pirate thugs laughed. Golduck. The Pokemon charged towards Izuku and Momo. She dashed forward and thrusted her staff forward, landing a hit on the Pokemon's head to disorient it, then swung full force with a spin. The hit landed directly under the Pokemon's chin and sent it flying back to its trainer. What the fuck was that? The shock in the group was clear, and Izuku made use of that moment to dash between them and the young trainers they cornered. A Corphish tried to intercept him, but to their horror, when Izuku grabbed the claw that tried to attack him, the shell began to crack under his grip. Clench whatever you crustaceans call a chin, Izuku said before pulling back a fist and landing it hard on the Pokemon's face. These guys aren't human. Izuku counted a total of 5 Team Aqua grunts and 2 civilian trainers behind him. They weren't familiar at all, so he guessed they weren't some media characters. Let's end this quick. Skarmory, use your new move, Momo called out as she slammed her staff down on a Quagsire. Skarmory soared higher into the air before charging up and unleashing a beam of white energy down towards the enemies. Unfortunately, that seemed to have drained a lot from Skarmory as the Pokemon began falling to the ground. One of the grunts called out a Geodude. Not on my watch, Izuku exclaimed as he grabbed the Pokemon and threw it towards Team Aqua. How the hell are they fighting Pokemon? Compared to Nomus, these are nothing, Momo muttered as she sent another Pokemon tumbling to the ground. Return, she called back Skarmory to its Pokeball before it crashed into the ground, then called out a different Pokemon. Mawile, time to do some cleanup. Shit, we're losing, one of the grunts grumbled as their Geodude got up. Make yourself useful, self-destruct. The Pokemon hesitated for a second, but charged towards Momo and her Mawile. The Geodude began to glow, and as it was nearing Momo, a hand grabbed it by its head and slammed down hard on the ground. Izuku, Momo yelled as the explosion erupted from below Izuku. Now's our chance to escape. The grunts began running away, leaving their unconscious Pokemon on the field. Momo ran up to the crater, looking around for Izuku. A hand grabbed her shoulder, and she found him relatively fine with his clothes completely ruined. They both looked around the ruined field. Unconscious Pokemon were everywhere, and the young trainers they tried to help were no longer there. They had to wait a few more minutes before the Pokemon Rangers arrived to take the Pokemon and had Izuku looked over for any injuries. He got several burns, but one of the Rangers already disinfected it and applied some ointment. They also gave him some ointment to apply repeatedly in the next few days until the burns fully healed. When they returned to camp, they were asked several questions about what happened, and a few people didn't take it too well. You charged into battle without your Pokemon. Nadia glared down on Izuku. They were training, Izuku tried to reason. That's not a good excuse. As Izuku was being scolded, Mai and Alai remained quiet at the front of the carriage. They didn't know exactly what happened, but even they knew going into battle with a clearly hostile group without their Pokemon would be stupid. None of them knew exactly how strong Izuku's Pokemon are. If they were inexperienced and newly hatched, they might understand his reluctance to use them in battle. But they were aware of Izuku's job of hunting down wanted criminals, so it was impossible that his Pokemon were weak. Additionally, he had an already evolved Pokemon. The only thing that really bothered them, though, was the clear lack of worry his Pokemon had for him. Were they not worried? How did the Rangers arrive so fast? Eli asked as they were setting up camp. We didn't even reach Oldale in the time they took to arrive at the scene. Well, they have teleportation panels set up all around the forest, Mai answered. They teleported using a psychic type to the nearest panel and rode their Pokemon to reach us. I guess this place is advanced in its own way, Izuku commented, as Izuku pulled out the expandable shelter Melissa gave him. He made sure there was a big enough clearing before trying to throw it, since he didn't get any other instruction from Melissa other than yeet the damn thing. Standing a good distance away, Izuku threw the cube, and upon hitting the ground, a similar flash of light from a Pokeball opening appeared. Then a box shelter was magically there. The hell? Kyoka exclaimed, seeing the whole thing happen. When did you get that? Oh, Melissa gave it to me. Melissa? Kyoka looked at him in confusion. Melissa Shield. Kyoka's eyes widened. When did she get here? Ah. At that moment, Izuku realized that he had not told anyone that Melissa arrived in this world. About that, Izuku received another scolding. Muhahaha, Setsuna cackled as she defeated another random trainer that battled her. You're an unbeatable buddy, Setsuna patted her Tropius. You're fighting kids, Itsuka mentioned. What? It's not like I'm using a meta team, Setsuna shrugged as she returned her Pokemon to its Pokeball. Besides, I need to get a good record to gain access to those fossil revival machines. You don't need a good record for that, Itsuka crossed her arms. You just want more spotlight so you could get a discount when they come to you with an offer. You know me so well, Setsuna winked. By the way, this place seems really busy, Setsuna commented as they looked around Dewford. The main thing about the city was that it was a good tourist spot because of the large beach and the cave nearby, along with the fact that there was gym here led by a fighting-type specialist. Those were some of the reasons why Setsuna was building up a win streak here. Most of the trainers here either had a water type they caught at sea, or a fighting type due to idolizing the local gym leader. Because of that, her Tropius easily defeated new trainers that only focused on brute force and had no strategies at all. I can't believe I'm friends with a bully, Itsuka mumbled. You're just salty since you lost to me last time we battled, Setsuna smirked. As the two continued to banter, neither noticed an individual watching them from a distance. Izuku looked at the littered papers around the table in front of Momo. What's going on? She's trying to figure out ways to make money, Kyoka was the one that answered. It's so hard to earn big money in this world, Momo grumbled. Worst of all, the price distribution in this world is so warped. Products used by humans most of the time never even cost more than 50 credits. But the same product made for Pokemon would cost triple, and no one would even question it. Then there was the matter with Pokeballs. In some places, you could buy a Pokeball for 200 credits if you're lucky, while in some places, the same Pokeball would cost over 1,000 credits. To make matters worse, there are laws regarding selling Pokemon products. Momo pinched the bridge of her nose. The Pokemon League was very strict when it came to people selling products related to Pokemon. Multiple permits were required, and a specific permit for each type of product was needed to be able to legally sell large quantities of it. Why not go into real estate? Izuku offered. He had done some research as well, and found out that land wasn't that expensive in this world. Even he was tempted to dip into his savings to purchase some land. It's not as profitable as you might think, Izuku. Momo showed him her journal. Managing land is very troublesome in this world. Izuku began reading the journal as Momo began explaining. Property damage caused by Pokemon happens very often, which results in maintenance of the land to be very expensive. Some places offer cheap rent, but maintenance is up to the tenant, Momo explained. There's also the issue of wild Pokemon in the land. Judging by how exasperated Momo sounded, Izuku didn't even want to hear the explanation. I'm lucky I got my singing gig, Kyoka commented from the bed she was laying. That reminds me, why are you two here in my tent? Currently, both Momo and Kyoka were in Izuku's portable shelter, while the others were in the portable shelter brought by a lie that was given to her by her father. What? You want us to sleep outside? I mean, don't you guys have one too? Izuku, Momo placed a hand on his shoulder. A portable shelter designed to withstand Pokemon attacks cost 3 million credits. Izuku froze. Damn. So, Momo grabbed onto his arm. You don't mind us joining you here, right? Izuku began to tremble as his arm was squeezed between Momo's gifted chest. Oh, of course not. I'll set up my old tent out. See. Izuku was interrupted by Momo pushing him towards the small bed that Kyoka was in. Thanks, Green, Kyoka smirked. We should properly thank you. Don't you think so? I don't understand. Momo strutted closer. Yes, we should, she smirked. They're fucking. Mai narrowed her eyes at the shelter where Izuku and the two girls were. Two girls are in there, you know, Nadia responded as she placed the plates back into the carriage storage compartment. So, have you seen that guy? He could take 5 women in bed and still come out standing. Nadia raised an eyebrow. Why do you sound so sure about that? Mai looked away. I was just exaggerating. Mai, have you? All right, I admit. I had slept with him once back at Petalburg, Mai confessed with a huff. Was that your first time? Mai flinched. Well, yeah, I know things like that are supposed to be special, but you of all people should know that having a decent relationship is harder than becoming a champion. Nadia just looked at her blankly. So, I thought, why not hook up with a decent-looking guy that was nice? You do realize that most men would act nice on the first encounter with a woman. Nadia remained neutral-faced. That's the thing. He didn't know I was a woman until I let out these babies. Mai gestured to her boobs. Nadia stared at Mai for a while, and had to admit that her features did seem masculine and would pass a man if her boobs were hidden under baggy clothes. Her sharp eyes would make her look like a delinquent, and her haircut didn't seem very feminine either. Nadia sighed. And don't act so innocently. I know you jump at the first chance you get to ride him, Mai accused. Finding a guy that's actually husband material is so rare, you know, Mai shrugged. Besides, aren't you frustrated? I don't like your accusations. I can't wait to catch you riding him. Now I know how all of you must have felt whenever my wealth was brought up. Momo commented as they got dressed. Well, I don't think everyone has $1 million portable house, Kyoka replied. Kyoka and Momo had found out that not only Izuku, but even Brendan and the Ally girl had the same portable shelter, albeit with different specs. I guess we just happen to be surrounded by kids from wealthy families, Momo mentioned, making Kyoka give her a flat look. By the way, are we really going to travel all the way with the kid? Kyoka asked. I'm not sure as well. Momo rubbed her chin in thought. I'm certain Brendan's role in this world is the rival since his father is the professor. But we don't really get to see how the rival went about in their journey in the game. I'm concerned about potentially altering the story, Kyoka voiced her worries. We're not the same as Green, who's traveling with people with no connection to the story. Well, we don't exactly know how the story will go in this world, Momo said. It's a mix between the game and the anime, but the major side seems to be the anime. So we just let things play out. Honestly, I think that would be for the best. I'm just not sure how this world will adjust to us. Adjust to us? Kyoka looked at Momo in confusion. Kyoka, we're basically superhumans with experience taking down monsters with multiple abilities, Momo stated. In all honesty, I see no difference from a Pokemon, and a Namu other than one can be my friend. I wouldn't call myself a superhuman, Kyoka shrugged as she put on her cap. You have super hearing and resistance to vibrations. It was Momo's turn to give Kyoka a flat look. Come on. Compared to Green, who can toss cars, that's nothing. We shouldn't compare ourselves to a main character. I hate that I agree with you. Momo had observed what remained of their quirks with them during the early months of their arrival on this world. Most of them had only maintained the resistances they had with their quirks, like Kaminari's resistance to electricity, Ashido's acid resistance, Bakugu's blast resistance, and a mixture of all the above for Izuku. Compared to Itsuka, Takage, Kirishima, and even herself, Izuku had maintained a level of strength that was comparable to someone with a quirk. Adding his monstrous endurance and tenacity, Izuku is without a doubt the strongest human in this world. They also can't ignore the chance of their potential children manifesting quirks, since their DNA was barely altered. You're picturing having a family with him, aren't you? Kyoka narrowed her eyes at Momo. Momo flinched. Why not? And you're not on a birth control either, Momo accused. You can't judge me, Miss Fill Me up to the brim. Kyoka blushed and sputtered. I don't want to hear that from Miss Smash Me. While the two were bickering, Izuku decided that it would be best to come back later to check on them. Laverage was Katsuki's first gym, since he deemed it the weakest with some new gym leader taking over. He's not underestimating them since being a gym leader still requires a significant level of skill, but he didn't want some new kid to be one of his later battles. Welcome to the Laverage Gym, a receptionist greeted him. Are you here to challenge the gym trial or the gym leader? Gym leader, Katsuki replied. He handed the receptionist his trainer ID and waited as he began checking something on his computer. Katsuki wasn't expecting much of a fight since not only is the gym leader new, but they'd also be using Pokemon according to Katsuki's trainer rank, which is 1. A gym leader may have decent skill, but using Pokemon that isn't part of their personal team isn't easy. Your schedule will be in 2 days. 11 in the morning, the receptionist stated as he handed Katsuki his ID back. Katsuki's eyes twitched at the mention of 2 days with nothing to do. He had already checked with the ranger camp, and there were no sights of criminals in this area, so he can't go hunting. He might as well check if there was somewhere that sold a decent Firestone here. Much to his disappointment, the market here was far too lackluster at all. Thrash goods were sold everywhere that made Katsuki question why this place was even allowed. He knew that this city was only thriving due to the hot springs in this area, so he really wanted to smack himself in the head for even trying to go here. As Katsuki was walking back, something had caught his eye. It was reddish-brown marble with a black and red helix in the center. Normally, he'd ignore it, but it was something that had crossed his mind a few days ago while training his new Pokemon. Katsuki approached the shop. "How much for that marble?" The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow at him. 50 credits. If the stone was real, then that price would be one hell of a bargain. If not, it was a waste of 5 days' worth of food. But it was a cheap gamble that Katsuki was willing to take. Based on the timeline, this world still had no knowledge of Mega Evolution since it was introduced in the 6th game. But there was a loophole since Mega Evolution was also introduced in Gen 3 Remake. Katsuki swiped his trainer ID and received the marble. Now he needed to test it. But he's missing an important factor: the keystone. Katsuki began running around the market looking for one. "Only one of those is an actual Mega Stone," Izuku said through the call with Katsuki. Fuck. Katsuki had literally bought every marble in Laveridge City. He had separated the first Mega Stone he found since he was sure that it was Houndoom's. But the hundreds of other marbles in a box turned out to be just normal marbles. Since Katsuki only knew what a few of them looked like, he resorted to buying any marble with a helix pattern. Unfortunately, that was every marble in the city. Fucking waste of money. "You didn't consider the size?" Izuku asked. The majority of the marbles Katsuki had bought were only half an inch in diameter, which was too small for the Mega Stone that should be an inch larger. "Fuck you," Katsuki hung up. Izuku stared at the screen blankly. They had already arrived in Oldale Town and had checked into a hotel. Obviously, Izuku would be staying in a different room, but would be nearby just in case anyone tried something. Though, he would have a bit more freedom since Izuku wasn't a hired bodyguard and would not need to be always at Alai's side. Izuku also did a simple background check on Alai and found out that her father was one of the major figures in the production of potions used by Pokemon. That meant she wasn't just normal rich. She was Yaoyorozu back in their world rich. It made Izuku wonder why she wasn't ever shown in the franchise. A sickly girl from a rich family seemed like a good plot for an episode. "I wonder how long we'll be staying here," Izuku muttered as he left the hotel. They had arrived at Oldale Town in the morning, so it was only around lunchtime right now. The town was quite lively with a lot of trainers roaming around the place and challenging each other for a battle. The hotel had a battlefield at the back, so a lot of people were gathered there. Izuku wanted to check it out as well. But the only thing that greeted him was just a bunch of kids battling to see whose Pokemon could hit harder. He felt a bit sorry for the referees who looked exhausted with all the matches they had to supervise and record. These battles were counted as official matches and would be put on these young trainers' records. So Izuku was sure some of them would be cringing at themselves in the future. Midoriya. Izuku turned around to see a familiar face smiling at him. "Zero, been a while. Tell me about it. Why do you look bigger?" "Training Pokemon is quite the workout," Izuku laughed. Zero felt a bit sorry for Izuku's Pokemon. He had seen this man crush Anamu's head with his quirk being nullified, so he could only imagine how terrifying training for his Pokemon was. "What have been up to?" Izuku asked. "Just taking a break. I wanted to give Danky some space to mope," Zero shrugged. "Did something happen?" "I'm guessing you don't watch our streams," Sir chuckled, and Izuku had scratched his head in embarrassment. "No worries, most of our content is mostly directed at kids anyway," Zero assured him. "Actually, most of our viewers are children and women." "But what happened to Kaminari?" "Well, he actually had a girlfriend recently." "Had?" "You know the whole multiple relationship being allowed here?" Izuku nodded. "Well, being allowed and being able to do it are different stories, and Denki found out the hard way." "Ah, so. It's not a what happened question, but a what did he do question." "Bingo," Zero snapped his fingers. "A woman gave him a chance, and they began dating. But the idiot began flirting with others despite just getting into a relationship. I'm guessing his girlfriend didn't react well. Obviously, Sir sighed. And apparently, news spread fast here too, since pretty much everyone in the stream began roasting him in the live chat. Izuku grimaced. That must have been awful for him. He wasn't outright ostracized, but I'm pretty sure he won't be getting a new girlfriend anytime soon. Public opinion is still as scary as ever. Looks like you're making some progress. Izuku observed the small traces of blue energy surrounding Riolu. It wasn't to the extent that was usable, but one step forward was still progress. And completely mastery over it wasn't Izuku's goal for Riolu. Most Pokemon had one advantage that's often looked over, and that's evolving. Pokemon gain a significant boost upon evolving, and Izuku plans to take full advantage over it. Hey! Izuku glanced behind to find a bunch of kids. Their arrogant and cocky look reminded him of Katsuki's early days. I challenge you to a battle, the kid in the very front shouted. Normally, Izuku would find this normal for kids, but something felt off. Some of these kids looked ragged, and the sudden challenge felt a bit suspicious for Izuku. If we win, hand over all your money. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Any battle involving money must be conducted under a supervisor, and a trainer ID must be presented, Izuku stated. Izuku noticed the kid at the front stiffen for a second, and the others looked around nervously. You kids aren't authorized trainers. Who cares, we can still bet money with this. The kid held up a card. Izuku recognized it as a bank card. It functions the same way as a trainer ID when transacting with money. But the bank provides some benefits when used often. A person needed a recommendation from someone reputable to get one. So how does a kid have one? I don't what you kids think you're doing. But do you think people will just comply? Go, Bisharp. A literal edgy Pokemon came out of the Pokeball. Izuku would have been impressed, but it seemed like the Pokemon didn't truly belong to the kid. He pressed something on his phone before grabbing Quilava's Pokeball. Scared now? The kid began laughing. But the Bisharp wasted no time and rushed Izuku. Quilava, let's see how you've grown. Quilava came out of its Pokeball and raised both arms forward and unleashed an explosion. It was small compared to what Katsuki was capable of, but it was a decent attack. The Bisharp faltered a bit, but quickly resumed its attack. It was safe to assume Quilava wasn't the best at dodging, barely avoiding Bisharp's Night Slash with his clumsy movement. Fire one into the ground. Quilava sent out an explosion into the ground, blowing dirt everywhere. Quilava used that moment to get close to Bisharp and unleashed a more powerful explosion to its face. Izuku grimaced at how brutal his Pokemon was. Bisharp was knocked out, but Izuku was sure that if it had battled with a proper trainer, they would have likely lost. You cheater, the kids began whining, but Izuku had no time for this. What happened here? Izuku smirked. He had sent out a signal to the Pokemon Rangers, and they had arrived just in time. The kids tried running away, but the Rangers already had them surrounded. This is the first time I've seen a gang of kids doing this, one of the Rangers mentioned as they rounded up the children. We'll look for their parents first and find out what's really going on, they told Izuku. Izuku nodded without a word. He knew things weren't over yet after all. When the Rangers left with the children, Izuku headed deeper into the forest. In this world, there were 3 different types of criminals. Local criminals were petty thieves and thugs that were easily captured. Regional criminals were poachers, smugglers, and other criminal groups. Then there were the criminals that had a red mark. Criminals that needed to be got rid of at all costs, even if it meant taking them out. Izuku only read about 3 of them, and one of them was standing in front of him. I assume you knew I was waiting for you. A man wearing a red suit stood in the middle of a clearing. Clifford Undine. He was a reputable Pokemon breeder in Kalos a few years ago, until they found out he was abusively raising some Pokemon. Then, when they were at their limit, he would release them and have them go on a rampage. The bounty on this man's head was 5 billion credits. That's how dangerous he was. I'm very sensitive with people watching me from a distance, Izuku mentioned as he glanced at a Swellow with a camera on its back. Were you expecting me or someone more dangerous? The man said as several Pokemon with strange markings on their body. Clones. Oh, you're aware of what they are. It seems Giovanni's research wasn't so private after all, Clifford mentioned. Unfortunately, we haven't managed to replicate it exactly, but it should be enough to get rid of you. We don't concern you. Clifford was interrupted by Izuku suddenly appearing in front of him, hand already reaching for his neck. Swiftly reaching into his coat and pulling out a knife, Clifford managed to make Izuku step back a bit with a slash. Attack, Clifford ordered. Smash. I have seen a lot of trainers in my life, but this is the first time I've seen a trainer choose not to use their Pokemon, Clifford said as Izuku slammed down a Manetric into the ground. I'll make sure I'll be the last one you'll see, Izuku replied as the Manetric he slammed into the ground began to deflate. The sight made Izuku raise an eyebrow. Ah, I did mention that these clones are incomplete. The amount of damage to knock out a Pokemon would rather reduce these experiments. Useless. You seem chatty. Izuku looked around the Pokemon surrounding him. All of them were of the canine variant. Mytina, Manetric, Granbull, Houndoom, and an Arcanine acting as the leader of the pack. Considering this guy's background, it somehow fits. Well, I have no reason to hide anything from a deadman, Clifford replied, pointing his knife at Izuku. Tear him to pieces. A Houndoom lunged at Izuku with its fangs lit up with flames. Izuku ducked to avoid the attack, then grabbed one of Houndoom's back legs and swung the Pokemon at a Granbull that was charging at Izuku with headbutt. Two Manetrics rushed towards Izuku, their bodies sparking with electricity. One jumped to attack from above, while the other struck below. Izuku grabbed both Pokemon by their necks, letting the electricity course through his body. I've been zapped harder than this, Izuku yelled as he jumped towards a group of clone Pokemon and tossed the electric types at them, causing a small shockwave of electricity. Smokescreen, Clifford called out, and the fire types in the group covered the clearing in smoke. He had expected the smoke to make it harder for Izuku, but it only managed to give him even more of an advantage. Izuku moves through the smokescreen, taking down his enemies with quick and powerful strikes to their head. By the time the smoke cleared, the only thing left standing was the Arcanine that was supposed to be leading the pack. Good trainer, awful battler, Izuku said as he tossed a deflated Mytina to the side. If you had given them proper commands, this would have been a lot harder. To Izuku, this was no different than taking down third-rate villains that were brought along to be cannon fodder. When All for One had created a Namu with quirk nullification quirk, Izuku had no choice but to become an expert at quirkless combat. Combined with the base strength he got from training for One for All, Izuku was a league of his own. This is impossible, Clifford shouted. Arcanine. The Arcanine was fast. It caught Izuku off guard, causing him to dodge a little too late and receive a slash on his chest. His shirt was torn, and 3 shallow cuts were left on his chest. Izuku found the sudden improvement in quality of the Pokemon to be quite suspicious. I need to end this quick, Izuku muttered as he and the Arcanine shot forward. The Arcanine was significantly faster, but Izuku could react at speeds far exceeding what the Pokemon can do. He slid under the Pokemon, kicking it in the belly. The Pokemon was tossed on its back, and with a swift leap and spin midair, Izuku delivered a powerful axe kick to its gut. This isn't over, Clifford yelled before teleporting away. That's going to be annoying to deal with going forward, Izuku muttered before taking out his Pokenav to call the Pokemon Rangers. In hindsight, I should have probably told the others. other than Izuku, Siro, Momo, and Kyoka were in Oldale Town, and would have been a lot of help. A while later, the Rangers arrived, and were confused and panicked at the sight of shriveled-up Pokemon litter everywhere. Izuku did his best to explain the situation in a way that he didn't sound crazy. He left out the part that he knew about the clone experiment prior to this, and said that Clifford explained it thinking that he wouldn't survive the encounter to tell others. It was safe to say this problem wouldn't be resolved anytime soon. Izuku had received a message from Nadia that they were all exploring the town and buying some supplies, so Izuku knew they weren't at the hotel. That gave him some time to think about his current problems at the moment. He wasn't sure if the incident with the children was related to Clifford, but both parties had similarities of having someone influential backing them up. The children had a bank card that could only be obtained by someone who has a reliable and well-known guarantor. Clifford was a very wanted man with every Pokemon Ranger base having a poster of him on their boards, so it was impossible for him to get the resources to conduct cloning. Izuku's first move would be to figure out which organization is behind Clifford. They need to be edgy enough to have the funds to support such a project and keep it hidden from the world. A big lead Izuku had was that the organization needed to have access to Pokemon ranches, since in order to clone Pokemon, you needed something to clone. The Pokemon Clifford used weren't strong, but they showed small signs of being at least trained to a certain level to only bring out an evolution, then send them to the ranch. Almost like you only evolve them to complete a Pokédex. Should I really care about this? Izuku suddenly asked himself. He had already gone through enough. Did he really need to go through so much again? Meddle or live quietly? What should he do? A flash of light caused Izuku to glance behind him. Riolu stood on top of the bed with his arms crossed. Something wrong? Riolu just continued to stare silently at Izuku. Wa. Fo oi uhiar. I must be going crazy. Izuku rubbed his forehead as Riolu stood in front of him. The Pokemon had a very determined expression on its face, a look Izuku seemed somewhat familiar with. The voice he heard definitely came from Riolu, which meant he was getting a good handle on his aura. Izuku would have brushed it off if he wasn't aware of the possibilities that aura granted. Lucario had a movie about it after all. I'm very happy that you've improved enough to be able to speak. Izuku patted Riolu on the head. But what I'm dealing with right now isn't simple. Riolu's expression remained determined. I'm aware of my situation, and self-worth was hammered into me in more ways than one. So you don't need to worry, Izuku assured. I plan to live comfortably in this world, but there will be situations where I'll be needed, and I don't know if I can refuse. Izuku knew that without One for All, he wouldn't be able to do much. He's been able to match his foes so far, but there's limits. Stronger enemies mean stronger Pokemon. Izuku was sure he couldn't match a pseudo-legendary in terms of power and technique, could only take you so far without the raw power to back it up. It reminded Izuku of Ojiro. He was by far the best fighter in class, but his lack of power greatly held him back. A normal punch can't beat an explosion that can destroy a whole house, no matter how good you threw it. In the future, I'll be relying on all of you, Izuku told Riolu. Riolu nodded, even more determined to get stronger. You lost? A man wearing a skull mask and a black suit asked Clifford, who was kneeling in front of him. He was abnormally strong. He could throw around the clones like they were nothing. You think that's an excuse for your failure? I handed you over a dozen Pokemon, and you lost to some no-name trainer. Clifford was enveloped by a purple glow and was lifted into the air. Please me give another chance. Second chances are only given to those that have shown results, the masked man stated before the walls were painted red. Well, it's pretty obvious who's my current strongest Pokemon, Izuku muttered as Quilava defeated both Trico and Riolu in a free-for-all match. Quilava's official rank is 4 stars, meaning that he was considered to be on the level of Pokemon that reached the conference. It may not sound impressive compared to the Pokemon Izuku has seen in the anime, but in this world that was already praiseworthy. Looks like you're getting a good handle on that new move of yours, Izuku mentioned as small sparks danced across Quilava's fur. The process was completely different to Katsuki's quirk. Execution was pretty similar. Katsuki ignited his sweat, so it relied on him producing the fuel before creating explosions. Quilava didn't have that weakness. His fur was naturally combustible, allowing him to make explosions at will. The only issue was that unlike Katsuki, Quilava's output relied entirely on him. He couldn't store sweat for stronger explosions. Well done, everyone. Izuku clapped his hands as he approached them. Quilava huffed, with a small flicker of flame coming out of his head. Izuku remembered that it was the equivalent of giving someone the middle finger for fire types. Izuku made a note to be a bit rougher next training session. Looking over his Pokemon, Izuku noticed that compared to the anime or the games, it's actually possible to tell the signs of the Pokemon nearing their evolution. Yellow fur was starting to pop on Riolu's chest. Quilava's yellow fur started to turn a deeper shade. Unlike the other two, Trico didn't have any visible signs yet, but he'll get there someday. Though, among the other two, Izuku figured that Quilava is the closest to evolution. Even though he was in the rehab center for a couple of years, he still had a lot of experience. Once we reach Petalburg City, we will be doing a lot of trainer battles to get you guys used to fighting Pokemon under someone's command, Izuku announced. And a major advantage we can exploit is the fact that trainers call out a move before the Pokemon uses it, Izuku smirked. We stayed here longer than I expected, Eli mentioned as they reached the exit of the city. I hope it didn't interfere with your schedule. It's fine, Mai assured. We have loads of time. Besides, we needed to get some supplies to make sure we didn't starve on the way to Petalburg, Izuku added. That reminds me, Nadia spoke up. Why did you ask us to keep an eye out for some marbles? Well, there's a study about certain stones that can make Pokemon stronger, Izuku answered, but didn't tell them the whole story about Mega Evolution. It was still a risky topic to be revealed, so Izuku wanted to keep it a secret as much as possible until more signs of it went public. He knew Katsuki was actively searching for them, and the others would definitely follow, so Izuku wanted to at least keep an eye out for them. That sounds like something related to Steven Stone, Mai mentioned the champion. Izuku looked thoughtful for a moment, remembering that the champion was supposed to have a Mega Metagross. Well, he'd probably one of the first people we would see use it if it was true. Though, isn't it rather plain looking? Nadia asked, holding up the drawing Izuku gave them. That's why they aren't easy to find, Izuku replied. And they're more centered around Kalos. Oh, like the Z-stones in Alola, Mai said. I always wanted to go there. Maybe after this trip? Eli asked Nadia. You need to get permission from your father, Nadia stated firmly. Traveling in your home region is something, but going to a different region is another story. Since we're at the topic of what to do after this trip, what about you? Mai asked Izuku. I'm not sure yet. Joining the home league was mostly because of my friends. Nadia hummed. If you make a name for yourself, you can start a business. A business? Like a mercenary agency, Mai spoke up, remembering Nadia mentioning Izuku running around and catching criminals with bounties. I'll think about it, Izuku responded. Or you could marry some rich woman and live a comfortable life, Mai offered. I'd refute that. But that's actually a possible route for you, Izuku, Nadia surprisingly agreed. I don't think that's possible. In all honesty, Izuku, the standard of remaining men here is very. Nadia cringed. They either get you pregnant, run off to a different region, abandon their families, become criminals for no good reason, and a lot more, Mai ranted. Don't even get me started on men that think just because having multiple partners isn't frowned upon that it's okay to go around looking for women. That sounds personal, Eli commented. Rah, Mai screamed. You fought a villain called Clifford that trains dog Pokemon. Momo raised an eyebrow. Did he have red hair? Not really, but he did wear a red suit. Why do you ask? Izuku looked at Momo's image on the call with confusion. Clifford the big red dog. It's a reference to a pre-Quirk era show, Momo informed him. Can't it be a coincidence? Izuku really didn't want to deal with this so early in the morning. We're in a world that was a media franchise. Recognizing potential references may help us figure more about the people we'll encounter that was never shown in the franchise. I can't believe that makes sense, Izuku muttered. All right, I'll keep an eye out for Captain America. Momo giggled. I'm looking right at him, she quipped before hanging up. Well, that was eventful, Izuku mumbled as he got up from sitting on Quilava. You may be my strongest Pokemon right now, Quacken, but you really need to work on your combat instincts. Izuku noticed another difference between his Quilava and Katsuki. His old friend was naturally gifted with combat instincts that allowed him to go toe-to-toe with veteran heroes and powerful villains, while Quilava embodies the phrase, if you hit hard enough, it will go down. The only thing his Pokemon cared about was doing a powerful attack. He didn't target weaknesses and made obvious indications of his next move. Any elite-level Pokemon would easily beat him in an actual battle. You've already got a good handle on Ignite, so the next thing we'll train is combat style. Izuku had begun to call Explosion Ignite, instead to avoid confusion with the already existing Explosion. Let's begin. Riolu and Trico, who were in the middle of training their physical abilities up, retreated to the side of Quilava, being subjected to the most sadistic training they have ever seen. What's wrong with you, Quilava? Mai pointed to the Pokemon laying on the roof of the carriage. Quilava had gained the habit of resting there under the sun, instead of being in his Pokeball. This time he was completely knocked out and looking half dead on the roof. Training was hard for him, Izuku replied with a smile. None of us have actually seen you train your Pokemon, so that's kind of concerning, Mai commented. Well, I'm teaching him a combat style that suits him, so he'll be like that for a while, Izuku said. I can't go easy on him, or else he might develop habits that might become problems when he fights opponents that are a lot stronger. Okay. Mai turned back to the path. They will be arriving in Petalburg City by sunset, which will give them enough time to get a hotel room and even a little bit of sightseeing. It will also be where Izuku will have his first gym battle. In the anime and game, Petalburg would be the 5th gym you'd take on. But those rules didn't apply here. You can take on any gym in any order. So, Mai drawled out. We'll be staying in Petalburg for a week. Want to look around with me? Are you asking me out on a date? Izuku asked with a smirk. Well, yeah, Mai admitted. I don't plan on losing to those two after all. Two? Izuku looked confused. The two we met along the way. Momo and Kyoka. Yeah, whatever. I won't be losing to them just because you had a threesome with them. They're dating. I'm more of the spice in their relationship, Izuku stated. That sounds bad, Mai cringed. No offense, but it sounds like they're treating you like a dildo. It's fine. We already talked about it. So, date me? Mai asked again. Sure. Let's explore around Petalburg when we're free. Great. Let's find you a first wife as well, Mai added, making Izuku double take. I beg your pardon. What? Sorry, hot stuff. But I don't fit the whole first wife thing. Huh? Izuku remained confused, and that's when Nadia decided to join the conversation. Ahem. Nadia peeked between their shoulders. What Mai is trying to say is that in a harem, the title of first wife is given to the person that is the most responsible and caring. I still don't understand, and harem. Let's be honest, Izuku. It's a crime for you to only have one woman, Nadia stated like it was an undeniable truth. Eli is too young to hear this, Izuku said. I'm 21 years old, Eli yelled back from where she was reading a book. She's older than me? Izuku exclaimed in shock. And when her father finds out about you, she'll be definitely told to marry you too, Nadia added. I don't like this prank. Izuku shook his head. Why are you guys always targeting my marital status? You're an easy target, Mai replied. Back to the topic at hand. The first wife is the one that seduces you by being caring and supportive, Nadia explained. Seduces me? Why are you questioning everything? Why not just let you dick be in control for once? Mai grumbled. That's a horrible thing to do, Izuku reacted. That's right, Mai. And that's why Izuku should get a harem. Nadia nodded in approval. I don't want a harem. Mai and Nadia gasped. You intend on breaking the hearts of countless women who only wish to have the opportunity to pursue your heart. Gah! Izuku flinched when his conscience was being targeted. This isn't fair. Then man up. That was torture, Izuku muttered. They had finally arrived at Petalburg City and got rooms in the hotel, but Izuku did not enjoy the journey. They always targeted Izuku's relationship status, and it was really starting to make him uncomfortable. Nadia had admitted that she was frustrated, and having Izuku around was a challenge for her every day, so she resorted to just pestering him to get a relationship instead. Mai just wanted to tease him, and Delai simply did not care about relationships yet. I don't understand women at all, Izuku mumbled as he arrived at a laundry shop. He had weeks' worth of clothes he needed to wash, so he had to get things done tonight, or else he'll be walking around in his underwear tomorrow. That's a tempting sight to see, Izuku flinched. He didn't notice that he was already at the counter and was mumbling his thoughts again. How may I help you? The woman at the counter was a woman that looked to be around her late 20s, and somehow reminded Izuku a lot of Pixie Bob, both in appearance and vibe. I wanted to get 3 weeks' worth of clothes washed. Oh, how would you like it? The woman leaned closer to Izuku. Machine? By hand? Or do you want me to do it myself while you pound me from behind? Ga? The woman was shoved to the side by another woman. Sorry about her. She's desperate. She's a young woman with brown eyes and burgundy red hair styled into 3 bangs going across her face. She was dressed in a very reserved fashion, choosing a knee-length skirt, dark leggings, high-heeled shoes, and a turtleneck sweater with a loose collar. She reminded Izuku too much of someone he had a crush on. Mandalay. The woman tilted her head in confusion. I'm sorry. Ah, sorry. You just looked like someone I knew, Izuku replied. Mandalay was Izuku's hero crush growing up. She didn't have a combat-related quirk, but she was a core member of the Wild Wild Pussycats. He liked her even more when he saw her caring nature whenever he spent time with Kota. It was also a huge bonus that she was very attractive. I'm Esther. How can I help this evening? I wanted to get these washed. Izuku took out a trash bag filled with laundry. That will probably take 3 machines, Esther said. Would you like to use our store's soap? Izuku nodded. Please check our store's membership promos to decide on which ones you're comfortable with, while I get things ready. Feel free to ask me anything you wish to understand. As she walked away, Izuku had to stop his eyes from staring, looking at the store's promos. Izuku decided to just pay with cash since he won't be coming back here too often during his journey. Here's everything. Esther handed him a basket with different kinds of soap. There's more than one. Of course. The soap to wash the clothes, the fabric conditioner. As Esther was listing out the soaps, Izuku began to get even more confused. Esther giggled at his confusion. Let me show you how to do it. She gestured for him to follow her to the machines lined up to the wall. First, you'll need this. Esther picked up the largest bag and took out a small gel-like tablet. You need to put 2 here. She placed the tablets in the machine. Then your clothes. She picked out Izuku's black clothes. The machine began pouring in water, and a few seconds later, began to spin. I never thought washing clothes would be so complicated, Izuku remembered when he just tossed everything in a washing machine with whatever soap was in the laundry room. You'll get the hang of it, Esther smiled at him. Then she noticed something and reached for his collar, then neatly fixed it. Don't have anyone to do this for you? She gave him a warm smile. Izuku's face began to heat up. He began to frantically look around for any distractions. But all he saw was an empty laundry shop. Why isn't there more customers? Izuku nervously asked. Oh, we're already closed. Esther pointed to the entrance where the sign said open, which meant the one showing outside said closed. I'm so sorry, Izuku bowed. It's all right, Esther assured him. No one's waiting for me anyways. Izuku flinched. We should set these up with other machines to get things done quicker, Esther said as she leaned down to sort Izuku's clothes. At that moment, Izuku struggled to not stare at her rather firm ass. Then at that moment, a memory from earlier that day came up. Seducing me by being caring, Izuku muttered. You have quite a lot of thick fabrics, Esther was startled when Izuku suddenly grabbed her. Sorry, sir, she squirmed as Izuku pressed into her. But we don't accept tips of any kind. That seemed to snap Izuku out of his trance, making him jump back. I'm so sorry, he groveled. I think we should continue this tomorrow, Esther gestured to the clothes. Yes, I'm sorry for coming when you're already closed. Izuku reached for his clothes, but Esther stopped him. You can leave this here, and we'll run them tomorrow, Sarah told him. Oh, thank you, Izuku bowed. Then, Sarah leaned to his ear. Would you like to walk me home? Izuku blushed. Sarah's eyes wandered down. Looks like I have my answer. Izuku turned redder.